All right, I'm recording. Dave Collum, thanks so much for your time. How are you doing, man? Been missing you.
I'm I'm sort of good. I got some health issues I'm wrestling with, but besides that, we're fine.
Before I forget, greetings from my lovely wife. I'm going to call her wife because we're not married yet, but I always call her wife, Eva, because she loves reading your stuff, she said. And so I just wanted to let you know.
I had a funny experience. I was up in the Adirondacks, as I told you before the podcast. I'm in a convenience store, and some guy says, "You from around here?" And I go, "No, I'm from Ithaca." He said, "You Dave Collum?" I go, "Oh, Christ, I got to stop this. This is getting nuts."
I saw the pictures, by the way, of your lovely dogs. How many dogs? How many new dogs do you have? Is that one or
There's
two?
4 dogs total, but we also have my son's visiting. He has 2 Boston Terriers, so we have in the cabin we have a total of 5 Boston Terriers and a Labrador. Now I'm back in my office, so I just have the Labrador. Meanwhile, the Boston Terriers are all up there raising hell. So we just got a new Boston Terrier.
Oh, this looks so sweet, Jesus. I used to have whippets, yeah, but that's a long time ago. Yeah. You know, the windhounds, what do you call it? Yeah.
The what?
Whippets. Do you know whippets?
Oh yeah, they're faster than fast. Yeah, I
They're
know.
like crazy fast. I mean, I think the
Crazy
fastest
fast.
animal is the leopard, or what do you call it? Gepard or gepard, leopard. I don't even know what it was called.
Leopard.
I think they're like, I don't know how many kilometers per hour, but yeah, and it's just beautiful aesthetic, when you watch them like running. Anyway,
It's like a cartoon character going over the hills. You go, oh man, that looks like Wile E. Coyote or the Roadrunner or something. Yeah.
yeah, no, I miss them. Anyway, Dave, geez, I mean, it's crazy times. Every time we go into a rabbit hole, and I've been like investigating and researching for different stuff like you do, like you've been doing for such a long time, and every time like, okay, it can't get worse than that. It can't get more criminal than that, more evil than that, more, I don't know, sadistic, psychopathic than that. And then
And then it does.
it's like, and you talked about like Whitney Webb, last time on Marty Bench show. And I mean, I'm sure, I think she must have nervous breakdowns, but I think she's so, what do you call it? Like so focused on her, on her job, on her research, that I think she leaves the emotion aside. But I saw that interview you mentioned, with Patrick, whatever, Pat David.
PDB. Yeah, PDB, Patrick Bet David or something. Yeah.
Exactly. He's actually from Iran. He's like me because I was born in Iran, so he was born in Iran. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, and I saw her crying, and it shook me to the ground because it made me, again, conscious and aware of what kind of shithole we are on this planet. So, you talked about all kinds of stuff with Marty about this whole, and it seems to me there's so few people, there's so much naivete. I'm not sure, or just, I don't know, underinformed or ignorant or not really able to comprehend the scope of it. When you talk about this whole, I mean, evil, sadistic stuff that's been going on for actually such a long time, whatever we call it, pedophilia or Pizzagate or all this stuff that's been going on. I mean, and the point is, it's not that it's just, it's so pervasive. I think these are your words, but it's so systemic and so rooted in the whole system. And when we talk about legislatures, politicians, media, Jesus Christ, I mean, judges, prosecutors, I mean, who's not involved in this whole system, in the upper echelon of these parasites?
Well, I think the uninformed part, I've been really trying to understand why there's this big divide. So, for example, I was talking to a friend of mine, and somehow the vaccine crossed our field of view, and she basically said, I believe in it, so we shouldn't talk about it. And the question is, how do how do some people see that the vaccine has been a complete farce at best, right? That's a generous term. And others totally stand behind it. And I think there's a host of reasons. One is there's a little bit of a political divide. So I think the right tends to doubt the vaccine more than the left. But that's just a bell curve shift. It's not a big effect, I think. I think of on social media, that your worldview is just so totally different than people who are not. And so, and I don't just, social media is not just Facebook. Something like Twitter is just so much more of a bombarding of your senses. And so you can't avoid stuff. And so I think there's that. And the other thing is, I think there's so many things that are so bad that if you haven't been sort of progressing towards an understanding, it's too much too fast. And so, for example, if you've been going along thinking that, the Kennedy assassination was Lee Harvey Oswald and 9/11 was a bunch of Arabs and, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden you get bombarded with Pizzagate and all that stuff. It's just outside your imagination. The idea of, people seem to be able to accept that child trafficking is a monstrous problem, but they don't seem to be able to wrap their brains around who's actually receiving these children. And it's not a bunch of pervs in trailer parks. They can't afford them. It's people, men of, I'm guessing mostly men of wealth and power, although there's some reason to believe there's women involved too. And then you get the spirit cooking, which is just outside everyone's Overton window, but it's unambiguously true. The only ambiguous part is whether they actually eat real bodies or whether they just eat make-believe bodies. And I'm inclined to believe they eat real ones, and that we get the make-believe ones to sort of provide cover. That's what you see on the internet. But I'm guessing there's a bunch of satanic sickos out there who are doing bizarre stuff. And I've been digging in. I was digging in before the Sound of Freedom showed up, and that then accelerated my digging. So I don't know if you remember the Wayfair scandal where they were selling stuff online for like $12,000. That's just an IKEA cabinet. What are you doing? And it appeared to be sort of an advertisement for children. They estimate that 800,000 kids go missing in the United States every year.
Yeah. What do you think is the total number, David? I mean, global.
Well, I've seen estimates at 4 million a year worldwide. And the 800,000 apparently does not include kids who we apparently have people who breed children, right? They're like a cash crop, and they breed them and they do stuff with them, and heaven only knows what. It's a rabbit hole that going down probably will cause great pain. And so there's a whole bunch that are not countable. And then the question is, who's going to count them? If there's 4 million kids missing worldwide, someone's going to have to explain to me why we never, ever see someone get caught receiving the children. You hear about the bad guys who are trafficking, but you never hear about the bad guys who are receiving them. And that tells me that I wouldn't be surprised if half of Congress was doing it. It would shock me, but not surprise me. How's that?
I mean, they're all blackmailed and extortable, pretty much.
Well, the other theory. So I've been reading about the child trafficking because I've been struggling with the question of how do you get people to do things that just look so anathema to what they ought to be doing. So how do you get someone to sell out the United States completely? The Bidens and the Clintons, and they'll just sell us down the river at a heartbeat. And also, how do you get people to do things that seem self-destructive? How do you get Prince Andrew to do a stupid interview, which he didn't have to do, and stuff like that? And I think they're all under control. I think at times someone has to take a bullet for the team, and I have this other working hypothesis, and child trafficking would explain it, right? So if you can entrap, the pervs who are in positions of power, you don't need to control all of them. You just need to control enough where they can cause hell for the rest. And then you get someone like Cindy McCain saying, we all knew about Jeffrey Epstein. Well, you didn't say anything, Cindy. Your husband didn't say anything, Cindy. Why do you think that's okay to say? The other thing I'm working on is this notion that they're not entrapping people of power. They are corrupting people and then giving them the power. So you don't get the power unless you're already owned.
With a few exceptions, I mean, would you say the Clintons are like inherently from beginning, like, they're just from, sold out, not only their soul, they're like so sick and so psychopathic, sociopathic and sadistic. There's just a few exceptions that you just know, there's no other way. I mean, but right. Gaining power,
But I mean, if you look at the U.S. war machine, how bad it is, the U.S. war machine could be a force for good if it served as a true sort of bouncer policeman of the world, and it's the only country that can really reach any part of the globe. But I think we're discovering that we're not invincible, and I think we're also, anyone who's been paying attention for the last 20 years has discovered that we don't hesitate to kill lots of people for no reason, right? I don't know what your allegiance to Iran is now, but Iran keeps getting in the way of the United States war machine. And I have no reason to believe that Iran's the guilty party here. So,
yeah. Let me go back to, you just mentioned the Sound of Freedom movie, because I just wanted to have your more concrete take on that. I mean, the thing is, the alarm bells goes off when somebody still believes in the official narrative or version of 9/11. And, there are a couple of interviews with Tim Ballard, the guy, the protagonist who's being played by Jim Caviezel or whatever his name is. And he, I think in one of the interviews, he talked about 9/11. And I mean, he was talking about the official narrative. And I'm like, oh, come on. I mean, it's like so much overwhelming evidence now, and, testimonies and this and that, and witnesses and expert opinions. And it just, I don't know. And the guy, I mean, worked for so many years in what is it, Homeland Security or, and he's got the intelligence and the investigative mind to dig deeper. I mean, isn't that something like a little bit suspicious?
Well, when I watched the movie, which I was surprised my wife went with me, I don't know why she did, because I don't think women like to go down rabbit holes the way men do. We go looking for bar fights, and they're usually trying to intervene and stop them. My wife had an allergic reaction to the movie that could have important meaning, and that is when he went and rounded up 50 kids, and turns out the girl he was actually looking to save wasn't there, and he goes deep into the Colombian jungle. And did you see the movie? Did you actually watch the movie?
Yeah.
The odds of him dying looked like about a 98%, right? I mean, it looked like a suicide mission trying to save her. And my wife had a conniption. She said he left a gigantic family back home. He left children at home, and his wife says, "Go save the girl." No mom would do that, right? My wife said there's just something so wrong with that part of the story. The problem I've had since, I'm in a doctor Zoom group, and I mentioned that I was going down this rabbit hole to these guys. These are just doctors from around the world who united to fight the vaccine story. So they have no inherent tendency to go down rabbit holes. They all have it now, by the way. I don't know a single person who fought the COVID story, the real frontline battlers, who isn't now also unbelievably dark about how the world runs. They don't think they're just battling a vaccine anymore. They're all super dark. One of them I asked, who I read his book against my better judgment because I'd read too much about COVID already, but I asked him, he went down every rabbit hole. And I said, were you prone to go down these rabbit holes? And he said, well, I knew there was things wrong with the world, but it hit me like a truck what I discovered during COVID. So in any case, I mentioned to this Dr. Zoom group has had all the famous battlers, Ryan Cole, Aaron Kheriaty, Bobby Kennedy, you name it, been through this group. And I mentioned I was going down this rabbit hole about pedophilia and its role in geopolitics. And the chat section of the Zoom group all of a sudden went bananas with links. And it turns out I was stunned by how many links these guys provided. And I'm pasting them into a Word document as fast as I can. And it turns out they were dark. They were super dark. And one of the things you run into is that there are people who think Ballard's not the good guy, that this is all a ruse. And you find out that the thing was funded by highly sketchy people, and Ballard has connections that you go, there's a woman named Liz Crocken who was supposedly mainstream press, who then went up against this story, and she's like sort of presenting herself as, this sort of a soul warrior Whitney Webb type. And then you find out she's on boards of these international Save the Children foundations, which you go, well, that makes sense. Well, actually it doesn't, because these organizations look like Clinton Foundation 2.0. They look like just big money laundering schemes to me. I don't think they're saving children. I think they're rounding up money from governments. You start running into strange characters like, the guy who sold the balloon art for $250 million. It made no sense. Well, turns out he seems to be up to his ass in this stuff. There's a whole documentary on him, and he's got connections that you just would not want to tell your mother about. And then you go, okay, so the balloon art might be a money laundering mechanism. And someone said all modern art is money laundering at this point. So, Hunter Biden art, you name it. But if you want to launder money, you just sell something for a stupid price, right?
Right.
And don't tell anyone who bought it, which is exactly what the Bidens did.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm not convinced we know who the good guys are, even in that story. I'm not sure sure Ballard's straight. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt until I get more data. But I'm thinking Mel Gibson was a good guy, but I don't know. This idea that, take one for the team. Maybe Mel Gibson for the last dozen years has been taking one for the team. And
so do you think it could be highly possible that they're just forming a narrative and, distracting and not really,
and certainly some of that, right?
Yeah. Jim Caviezel, the guy, also played the, Jesus Christ Superstar or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
He talked about the CIA, that he's, the CIA's the biggest child trafficker organization, but I don't know. There's something missing here.
I agree with that. With that.
Of course, but it's much bigger.
And the CIA can take any beating you can hand out. So hanging it on the CIA in some sense is a potential cover-up, because no one doubts the CIA is up to bad stuff. And if you tried to call them on it, you'd never catch them. You can't touch them. So they are a convenient whipping boy for anything that turns out to be evil. You say, that's the CIA. Yeah, they do that shit. They're just. But no one knows how to stop them, right? You try to stop them from a position of authority, you get assassinated.
Right.
So I don't know. It's a dark world. And then I just finished Taibbi's book called Hate Incorporated, which was about a 2000, maybe 18 or 19 book. It's amazingly still timely, although things have gotten much worse. He talks about the press being so corrupted, so worthless, and he hammers both sides. So if you can prepare yourself to hear both your team and the opposing team, which is all just tribalism, if you can handle that, you'll really enjoy his book. So if you're a Trumper, he'll hammer Trump, but if you're a Democrat, he'll hammer the Democrats. And so I had no trouble with it whatsoever. I can certainly live with it. They're all bad model. But he goes into gory detail about the screw ups of the press and how they're just at this point completely worthless / destructive. And he interviewed Chomsky at the end. And I've been kind of a Chomsky fan, despite the fact that he's ultra left and I'm pretty far right, because I think he tries to get it right. But he totally boned the COVID story.
Yeah,
He
totally.
totally boned
Very
that.
disappointing. I mean, what is it? Is that out of conviction, or is that
I
like
don't know.
cognitive dissonance? What is it? And
I've seen several people bone it, and I've had this feeling they just didn't take the time.
right.
So
Did you get
Chomsky's
injected,
probably
by the way,
87 years old.
Did you get injected? Or I mean, did you
Yeah,
get?
I had to keep my job.
Oh, really? That was
Yeah.
like mandatory. Oh my
I wasn't going to quit on a theory, right? That's the problem. Even if I know the odds now,
Mhm.
I think I would still take the jab rather than quit. I had too many years left.
Yeah.
Now it is possible that we're all going to die early. I just had one of my former grad students, quote, died unexpectedly at 41.
Mhm.
And the husband of one of my current research associates just keeled over in the living room one day. And that was clearly vaccine, because he'd had heart trouble ever since his third shot. He had been to cardiologists. They were mystifying him, going, would you please wake up? This is not that mystifying.
Yeah.
And he got the jab. He's having heart problems. We know this part. And so, but even the odds, it's one of those things where you go, when I get in the car, I do a risk reward ratio calculation, say, okay, I'm taking the risk to go to the store. And
Sure.
there's things we do, right?
Mhm.
So I'd probably do it just to keep my job.
You heard about the hearing in Australia where, they admit finally it's not a conspiracy theory anymore, that the Pfizer employees got a special badge.
Was that the one where the guy kept asking him a question?
Yeah.
He kept refusing to answer. Yeah. The Australians were the worst.
Yeah.
So I think there's some Australians who probably really are pissed off that they were the worst, but they went full neo-Nazi. New Zealand was very bad. The United States was bad. They're never going to admit it. They'll admit little tiny things.
They just sent out their patsies. I think, a bunch of, I don't know who these people were. I mean, it's not like there was not like a top level executive, CEOs answering questions. It just, I don't know who these people were.
Right, but he just kept not answering the question repeatedly. Yeah. It was annoying as hell. You wanted to reach out and smack him. And then for those of you who are not up to speed, again, because this stuff is like drinking from a fire hydrant now. It just hits you in this full force. But I, as of 2016, believe the climate narrative because I thought scientists were trying to get it right. I am now a full climate denier. I think it is actually impossible to predict. I think it's mathematically impossible to predict the temperature in 2100. And I'm not alone.
Especially in connection with this whole CO fraud and hoax. CO.
Well, that's the whole story. But we're going to spend trillions of dollars on it. We're going to. So with Marty, you probably saw the Marty Bent, Rudy Havenstein podcast I did.
Yeah.
And Marty said something that where he said they're going to. I mentioned the geoengineers trying to blanket the Earth with a black cloud to keep the sun from getting in. And Marty pointed out, and then of course they're going to tell us we have to use solar panels to get our energy. And then I sort of jibed back and I said, yeah, and they basically outlawed all the gas generators that would bridge the gaps caused by the messes that these two planets. So I don't see the mechanism by which the climate grift goes away, because you can always say, well, it's going to happen in 50 years.
Right.
It's the perfect narrative in that sense, because I remember Y2K. I went down that rabbit hole. It took me almost 2 decades to I think fully understand what happened. So I believe that what Y2K caused me to look into and become convinced is that the system is fragile if it starts cascading. So I had no way to know whether Y2K would cause trouble. I did know that once the trouble started, the cascading failures could be awful. And so I prepared much the way you would insure your house against fire, right?
Right.
But I'll admit I was a believer. I mean, there was nothing. So the whole thing was wrong, 100% wrong.
Yeah.
And then the question is, what was that? And what it was a grift by Silicon Valley. They sold tons of computers and software.
Gee.
So the whole thing was just one of these grifts. And that was the actual story of Y2K is that they upgraded every goddamn computer on the planet.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. Okay.
I bet you hadn't thought of that. I bet you hadn't thought about that. It was a great grift. But for example, I mean, I reached out to everybody. So my former roommate in college founded Goldman Software Group. And he didn't know what was going to happen. And so here's a guy who was on the pinnacle, and he was the guy who actually got me nervous about it because it was like late 97. He said, well, if you haven't started the fix now, it's too late. And he has no reason to lie to me. None whatsoever. And so he clearly thought that it was meritorious that computers were being fixed. But the fact that nothing happened, you can say, well, you know, I have a friend, a fraternity brother who is a CEO of a software company, and he said, well, we fixed it. I said, no, we did not fix it, because if we had fixed it, there would be pockets of failures, period. Because I can guarantee you not everyone fixed it. I guarantee you that's true, and nothing happened. The guy named Yeager, who was the Y2K whistleblower, sort of ringing the bell saying Y2K is a problem, around 6 months before the rollover, flipped his story. Said, we've solved it, it's not a problem now. And I remember the Y2K doomers felt abandoned. There was this chat board called Time Bomb 2000, which was the #1 chat board. And you could actually see the intelligence guys there at the chat board, because there's this guy named Dexter, I think it was. Decker. If anyone remembers the Time Bomb 2000, Decker will ring a bell to them. Decker was this guy who would never argue, but he would simply put up counter arguments to everything everyone said. So if someone said this chip's going to fail, he'd come up with all this detailed information about why that chip's not going to fail. And after a while, it became pretty clear that Decker was not just one person. Decker was a consortium of experts, probably in some brain center, probably in the Y2K headquarters, which they built. And the job of this panel of experts was to calm us the hell down, but at the same time sell computers and software. So that was a big grift.
Gee, what a big fraud. So Dave, what's on your radar? I mean, if is there something like really makes you worry? Like it's sort of a precipice of, if we can't make this like in a time on a timely fashion, like on a timetable, would it be, I don't know, geopolitics or I mean, is hyperinflation avoidable? Or World War? What about World War? I mean, are we gearing up for war, or what is this?
Here's what I can't even tell you for sure. I can't even tell you if the United States and Russia aren't actually cooperating.
I was just thinking about, because you posted about the Russian and Chinese vessels, or whatever you call it, naval.
Yeah, a flotilla is heading for where, Alaska or something, right?
Is this like a theater? I mean, is that like a?
Yeah, and
because you can't fight a World War III because they have such highly advanced hypersonic weapons and defense technologies. Even Iran, I mean, what are you going to do with ships? I mean, I was thinking like maybe they were trying to protect, their territories of, mining and, exploiting natural resources, like sort of as a backup for this, for the commerce, for trade, for whatever. But I don't know. What's your take?
Well, the Ukraine war, assuming that they're not working together to create the Ukraine war, which I don't have any evidence of, but I've just, my Overton window is now wide open. Unless something defies the laws of physics, I can entertain it as a possibility. So let's assume the Ukraine war is a legitimate war, and we're not just killing Ukrainians for laughs to get Russia, China, and the United States to get what they want. It's a horrific war. Some of my best writing I think I've ever done was last year when I wrote about the Ukrainian war, because the story was that, you know, Putin's bad, he's a madman, Ukrainians are a bunch of good guys, and that was the narrative across the Western press, and nothing was allowed past that. Nothing was allowed past that. And I found the offbeat voices, probably 40 of them, who were telling the other side of the narrative. And I noticed right away there was something wrong with the war story, right away, because we were hearing about how horrible the war was, but there was no Saving Private Ryan footage. There was no Baghdad Day 1 footage. There was no evidence of massacring. There were a lot of stage things. There were, I kept saying to my wife, this isn't a war. This is not a war. And it drove her nuts. And I said, look, the footage we're seeing is a bunch of grandmothers bitching about the war. We're not seeing the war. You see an explosion that's 10 miles away and you can't tell what blew up, right? You see cars burning in the street. Cars burning in the street is not a war. And so I think at first it was not a war. It was Putin doing a military intervention. And I believe that he was forced to do it. It was his best play. I believe that NATO wanted him to do it. I believe that NATO is the provocateur. I think that we should be sending weapons to Putin, not to Ukraine at this point. I'm just so pissed off at this whole thing. So in any event, so I found about 40 voices that were trying to get at the truth. And what I did was I wrote a coherent, I think it was coherent narrative, the alternative narrative. And these 40 voices were all fantastically good sources, best I could tell, but they were not bringing it all together. So to the best of my knowledge, when I wrote it, when I published it in December, it was almost the only thing of its kind at the time where I was pulling all the counter narratives together and describing the absurdities of this war. And you know, things like the Azov Battalion, the CIA was funding a bunch of neo-Nazis who were slaughtering you know, ethnic Russians in the Donbass, right? These guys were bad. These guys, my analogy is these guys are like Mexican drug cartels. There's not that many of them, but they're lethal. And we funded them and we encouraged them. And you know, Zelensky tried to get out of the war, and then we said, no, you don't. And so he went back into the war. And so now there's what, 500,000 dead Ukrainians, but we don't care because that's not our job to care. Apparently our job is to piss off Russia. That's assuming that's our job, right? And you know, Putin just grabbed some journalist. And the United States is throwing a shit fit. If I were Putin, I'd grab every American I could get my mitts on in a heartbeat. I would just find all the Americans. I'd scoop those bastards up and lock them up and say, okay, now let's talk, you douchebags. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Zelensky just picked up Gonzalo Lira, which I'm not sure I believe is true. That'll come off as odd to some people. But Gonzalo, at one point, he is an American journalist over in Ukraine talking about how farcical the war was. But there's something showman about him. There's a showboating quality. So then at one point he said, you know, if I disappear, blah, 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 you know, and then he reappeared, you know, and you're going, okay, he's building a brand or something. But he supposedly got scooped up by the Ukrainians. And our State Department couldn't give less of a shit about it. And they got challenged the other day, and he just said the guy wouldn't even comment on it. But then Gonzalo says, you know, they left the keys to the door open, and I'm told that this is what they do when they really want you to just get away. And he says, I'm heading to the Polish border, I hope I get there. He's showing footage. He's live tweeting his escape. And then next year, Reedy gets picked up. And I go, well, dude, first of all, you should have shut your mouth. And second of all, I'm now starting to wonder if any of this story makes sense. Because if I got away, the last thing I'd be doing is live tweeting my escape before I got to the border. That would be.
Yeah. Wasn't there a contradiction between what his wife said and I think something with before and after? I don't know, there was some kind of contradiction, and like it was blatantly obvious, that they were lying. But anyway, Zelensky's wife,
So in any case, the geopolitics is scary. Last year, I think it was, Glenn Greenwald wrote an article about the danger of having a U.S. administration which is not headed up by a single strong voice, which we've never had before. We've never sensed that the president had no say whatsoever, and now we know this. And the problem is that imagine if we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Biden was there instead of Kennedy. What chaos would ensue, right? At least we had, and I think all of our previous presidents had enough chutzpah to be able to play the role of, okay, the buck stops at the top, I'm making the call, but not Biden. I don't think Biden has that. I think he's out of his gourd.
Okay, what about Trump? Is there some truth to it that Trump could still be playing some kind of 4D chess game with in the process of, what do you call it, continuity of governance or something like that, and having some kind of wartime commando, because of his executive orders that he had signed? Is there some truth about that, or do you think it's just a bunch of real conspiracies?
The Trump story is so garbled that I just, it's very hard to make sense of any of it. So all the indictments look fraudulent to me. To indict a former president who's actually running again, and therefore really should be kind of hands off, is insane enough. But if you look at what he got indicted for, they're absurdities. So they're misdemeanors. They're, the things that Biden is accused of doing are way worse than anything that Trump is accused of doing.
It's totally ludicrous. They have weaponized the total, the entire justice system, and the judge, I think, presiding over the J6 whatever trial she's actually from Puerto Rico. Isn't she from Puerto Rico? And like totally biased and was working for a client of Burisma or something like that. Is there some kind of truth to that? Yeah, anyway, it's
well, so the problem is I've not seen a shred of evidence that Trump actually encouraged any insurrection like that. It wasn't insurrection either. They forgot the goddamn guns, right? Yeah. They didn't bring a single weapon with them, so it's really hard to call it an insurrection. It was what I'd call a violent protest. And also you got the 50 FBI guys running around. I even documented that there were Ukrainian nationals running around the crowd. So I think we brought in some Ukrainians, some Azov guys to cause trouble.
Right.
And then they're disposable, right? I don't know if those guys survived the day, right? They might have been capped when it was over. But so put it this way, I'll take January 6th over the George Floyd riots any day, right? They did so much damage. They killed so many people in the George Floyd riots, and yet somehow that was totally state-sponsored, completely state-sponsored. January 6th was the greatest political reversal I've ever seen. So they went into it in sort of a crisis mode because I still very much believe the election was rigged. I don't have any problem with that.
It's become obvious. Yeah.
And it's not just the data supporting the theory, but it's also they did everything within their power to keep Trump out of the White House. But you're going to tell me they ran a straight election? I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a second. I would hate to have to take that case in a debate, right? If you gave me I'd get annihilated. And then there's stupid things like, he'd been indicted in Georgia for election interference because he supposedly said he needed 11,000 votes. That's not what he said. What he said was, we need to find 11,000 illegitimate votes. And that's a completely legitimate thing to say, because we say, look, if we find 11,000 illegitimate votes, then Georgia flips. There's nothing illegal about that. There's nothing bad about that. It makes total sense. He didn't say, go find me 11,000 votes. He said, go find me 11,000 illegal votes. But somehow they've forgotten to mention that part.
Mhm.
And so, and if you want to blame the Democrats, that's fine. But I don't see the Republicans defending them. I think the Republicans and the Democrats both agree that they don't want him near the White House. And what appears to be support for Trump is coming from politicians who are just terrified of losing the MAGA vote.
Mhm.
Right? If you turn, like Pence, for example, Pence I had as kind of a front runner for 2024 to run. And then he turned against Trump. He's done.
He's sold out. I mean, the guy is such a.
But even if he took the right, even if you accept it as the right path, he's finished. Right? Yeah. He lost the MAGA vote. Right? That would be. And so you see a lot of pro-MAGA types. Who's the American president who got filmed in a tank? I know your listeners will hear it and go, yeah, whatever. He got filmed in a tank and it looked really stupid. That's kind of what DeSantis looks like to me now. He looks like he just can't. He can't find the hearts and minds that Trump finds seamlessly.
Yeah. And I have the impression DeSantis is, I don't know, somehow controlled by his wife or something. I don't know. Is some stories.
Well, she's hot. She can own me too. But he could be totally straight, politically honest and stuff like that, but he can't seem to find the sweet spot. Unlike someone like Kennedy, for example, but they're not going to let him near the White House. They will cap his ass before they let him near the White House.
Yeah. Mm.
And but he is getting near microphones, right? Uh-huh. The message is getting out.
Yeah.
And that may be what his goal is, just to be at the microphone nonstop.
Yeah. He's been going on a big tour now. I mean, all the major podcasts and I mean, I really respect Kennedy. It's just one or two, I don't know, taboos that he can't talk about, but I guess it's always with every president. You know, he can criticize this and that. But anyway,
I think he gets criticized for his climate change views. But I listened to him, and he has said in podcasts, and let's assume that he's trying to be honest and therefore consistent, that he said that climate change, the problems and the solutions should be identified in the free market. Mm-hmm. I can live with that. I have no trouble with that. If you like, the problem is that the whole climate change narrative has nothing to do with free market capitalism. You know, they're not building windmills because they're cost effective. They're not. I reached out to an energy security analyst one day and said, has anyone done a cradle to grave analysis to show whether these alternative energies could possibly achieve what they say they're going to achieve? And he said, yeah. I think his name guy was David Way or something. He said, I think David Way did it. And basically, David Way says, no way, no how. It's just a farce to think that we're going to. So we got to go to nukes. In 2021, I said that we would have an energy crisis. Uh-huh. To win the hearts and minds of those who don't support nuclear power. And boy, it started to look like one in 2022, didn't it? Or 2023. I can't remember what year I wrote it, but I think it was spot on. I mean, I think they're going to send us through a couple of cold winters and then say, well, we could give you nuclear power.
Right.
And,
I mean, I live in Austria, and, and Germany, the neighboring country, is I mean, they're definitely intending to destroy Germany. I mean, I don't know. It's just suicidal what they're doing. Decommissioning nuclear reactors and it seems.
Why? So this gets back to this question of why would someone who should have sort of a foundation level belief in their nation, why would they throw their nation under the bus? I mean, that's just treasonous, right?
This is beyond treasonous. I don't know. Are these people all? I don't know. Are they all just sold out, or are they all blackmailed?
So I was the New World Order sort of model is looking pretty good. And I was listening to a Douglas McGregor podcast. About every couple of weeks, I listen to McGregor because he gives us updates on what he sees going on in Ukraine. And he started talking about the New World Order. So McGregor's hitting the rabbit holes too. And this is a very elite colonel and a very scholarly guy. And he was talking about how it's clear that the United States stands between the globalists and their goal, right? So, and in particular, I think the globalists know they can buy off the rich and they can step on the poor, but the U.S. middle class has a kind of a unique tenacity to it.
Yeah.
And big, and it used to be powerful. So they have to destroy that. So they say, what they do? Well, COVID, lockdowns, transgender battles, George Floyd riots, just everything. And he was talking about how the Ukraine war is about bringing Putin to his knees because he's one of the last of the great nationalists.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's clearly gone down that dark hole. And I was a little surprised by it. But
yeah, because, Dave, I mean, whatever we want to, I mean, I don't have any faith or trust in any kind of political or whatever conventional structures, but whatever you want to think about Putin, I mean, the guy is still, his traditional values. He's rational, he's logical, and he's coherent in his argumentation. And he kicked out, didn't he kick out like George Soros and the types of, and throughout all this LGBTQ and trans whatever thing, I mean, mutilating children, all this, he just said no, no to all this bullshit. So there seems to be some kind of decency and traditionalism of values,
So without underplaying his potential ruthlessness, which we also know exists. So, but
right.
It's not like Justin Trudeau could run Russia, right? So, with that said, I actually think he is the most impressive of all the global leaders. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably on some FBI watch list for all the shit I say like that. But I think he's incredibly coherent, incredibly rational, and he can really hit the bullseye when he decides to come in with a statement. They're unbelievably wow moments when he decides to
that's the reason for censorship. I mean, there is no Russian today, and you have to look it up, like really go deep in the rabbit hole and find those links and sources and everything. But there's a reason, there is no Russian, translation or media or reports or, because they know, you could get the facts or the other side.
Another funny one was the Prigozhin coup, which I think was a complete staged coup. Mm-hmm. I reached out to a guy who's done a lot of tours of duty as a national security analyst. And I said, is there any chance that Prigozhin is actually defying Putin? He said, there is zero chance. He said, consistent with what I said about Putin, people who defy Putin at that level die. So one of the things that it did is that by Prigozhin supposedly going against Putin and moving his army in theory towards Moscow, it turns out Prigozhin was able to move his army within 100 miles of Kyiv, supposedly. Mm-hmm. I think I have the number right. I don't really know. My geography sucks. And so as a way to move his troops with I don't know if the West fell for it or if they just said, well, there's nothing we can do anyway, so we'll pretend. They love the anti-Putin stories, so pretending that Prigozhin's against Putin. But now they're talking about, I read articles about the Wagner group, sort of threatening Poland. I go, of course they're threatening Poland, right? We've put them in a position to threaten NATO. That's the way it works. You pick a fight, you get a black eye. So if, foreign nationals are over there fighting, I don't want to read any stories about Americans who've been killed in Ukraine. I feel bad for the families. I feel bad for the soldier who fought the wrong war.
Really sad. Really.
But it's like when that guy went to North Korea and came back in a box. That was a Darwin Award, right? There's just you go to Ukraine to fight, get ready to die.
Exactly.
Because that's what's going to happen to you.
Yeah. You just fought him. Yeah.
We destroyed Ukraine and we didn't have to. Putin had no intention of destroying Ukraine. He didn't want to have to rebuild it.
Exactly. Yeah. And he still wants to. I think I think that's the long-term strategy, not to. He might, take out all the, logistical, whatever, military logistical intelligence centers. Would you agree? I mean,
well, the other thing is he has decided it got real when they took out the pipeline and the Kerch Bridge and things like that. And so Putin said, okay, I guess we're going to have to fight this one. But I still think he's actually careful. He's taking out infrastructure to Ukraine, but he's not destroying it. He's just taking out choke points. The kind of choke point where it won't take a lot of money to replace it. So he's basically with bombs shutting off valves.
Yeah.
And so I'm appalled by the Ukrainian idiots. I'm appalled by. But these are the same idiots who actually are proud as hell that they drive an electric vehicle, ignoring the fact that the cobalt in their batteries being mined by child slave labor in the Congo. And saying, I feel good about your electric vehicle, but you're being built with slave labor. So, you can eat shit and die on that one. So I'm getting less patient with ignorance. And I may be wrong, but I'm trying like hell to get it right. I'm trying like hell to find the facts. And the one place you won't find it is on any of the news shows. Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
But they dealt with him.
What do you think about Tucker Carlson? I mean, is he super
real?
Is he like super ethical? I mean, super, or what is
I don't know. He's the most convincing fake, if he is. I have some thoughts on him getting fired. I watched the show and noticed an increase in intensity leading up to his firing over a number of months. And he started dropping truth bombs that were the kind that's gone, oh boy, Tucker, So he starts questioning whether Nixon got taken out by the CIA and starts talking about whether 9/11 was really done by the Arabs. And these are third rails that the authorities do not want to see touched. So I somehow have this feeling that he decided he was going to trigger his extrusion. And he had to force it, because he had to force them to break the contract.
And didn't he talk to the J6 police chief of whatever,
Yeah, he said the whole thing was bullshit. But we all know that, right?
Yeah.
That we know that Ray Epps is a Fed. If you don't know Ray Epps is a Fed, you got to wake up. And if you don't know that people were in solitary confinement simply for walking through the rotunda, you just got to wake up. And if you don't know that Julian Assange shouldn't be in prison for the rest of his life, he's a journalist. He was a journalist, and he's a journalist that the authorities didn't like. They just forced some woman who worked for one of the major networks. They're saying that she has to give up her sources. And it turns out it has something to do with a Chinese agent or something like that. And I go, but that doesn't allow you to make her give up her sources. You got to figure out who the spies are on your own. You don't get to tell, well, and it'll be really interesting to see if she hangs tough and if her network backs her and things like that. But we are becoming what we profess to fight. And Chomsky, I'll go back to Chomsky and Taibbi's book. He interviews Chomsky at the end of the book. Chomsky seems to think it's not worse now than it's always been. He seems to think we have a different view of it. I've wondered about that.
Really? He said that? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I worry he's a little. I worry he's lost his game.
Uh-huh.
I do worry about him. I mean, he's ultra radical, but I like Chris Hedges now. I made a list of people who I'd like to hear more from, and I realized that most of them were former liberals.
Mhm.
I'm not a liberal. I mean, but I'd be a liberal. I'd be an old school liberal. There's three liberals. There's modern liberals. There's the old school liberals, and then there's the liberals of the distant past who are actually libertarians.
Exactly. Yeah.
The old school liberals, the ones from the '60s, they're quite rational compared to anything we see today. So, and those are the Greenwalds and the Tybes and stuff. They're Joe Rogan, you name it. They're liberal in that school of thought. But they all seem reasonable. I also I used to be an atheist, and then I realized I sort of had some epiphanies reading who the hell was that guy who wrote the Bell Curve? I can't remember. That was Bloom, not him. But I read a book that really got into my skull, which convinced me that we really can't take religion out of society because it's a glue.
Or spirituality, which I would call it. I mean,
you gotta have a glue. You gotta have the glue. And although I myself am not a sort of a God guy, we absolutely need that. And I find myself listening to the guys who spot off about God. And although I'm not a God guy, everything else they say makes sense to me. So I'm siding with the God guys. I can listen to some high school kid rant about the Lord and the evils of abortion and stuff.
But do you believe in a soul? I mean, Dave, I don't want to become too, but I mean, because I found my way to spirituality through science, actually, because it's sort of the interconnection between, science or reality of truth and spirituality and soul. Is that something you want to talk about? Or
I'm happy to talk about it. There's almost no, here's subjects I stay off of. I don't go near Israel, Palestine. One day I got dragged there and my brother said, boy, that was dangerous. I said, yeah, I was trying to get away. I don't know. It depends on what you mean by spirituality, right? I mean, I don't believe in a higher being. Mm-hmm. I have no trouble with sort of Big Bang physics theories and stuff like that.
But you think about like the essence of creation. I mean,
Well, I think more deeply about what the hell it is we're here for, but I don't. But it doesn't end up in the supernatural sort of flavored part of religion. I do think the reason we need religion is because that's what every Sunday morning, the Christians would go to their church and they'd sit around and listen to some guy talk about why you have to behave yourself, and it's hard to imagine why that's a bad thing. It's easy to focus on religious whack jobs from the past who caused some trouble, but also a lot of those stories are distorted too, right? So if you look at you look at the scientists who were suppressed by the church, they were probably punk ass bitches. They were probably guys who, so you're sitting there, you're facing down the Catholic Church in some previous century. And you discover something. You discover something's the center of the universe or center of the solar system or whatever. You can kind of slide it in gracefully and say, the Lord did an amazing thing here. Or you can be a punk. And I think the guys who gravitate to science probably have a touch of punkishness to them. And so my guess is that the guys who got in trouble with the church were the ones who just couldn't avoid picking a fight. And in the old days, like in ancient Rome, some guys would want to martyr themselves. And I've read a lot of ancient history lately, over the last 20 years lately. And they'd go to court, they'd want to martyr themselves. And the judge would say, you sure about this? I mean, look outside, the sun's shining. You can go out there, have fun. The Roman judges didn't want to just fry these guys. Mm-hmm. And they didn't want to make them sacrifice everything for some religious belief. So they often try to talk them off the ledge. So, so a lot of history screwed up. The Spanish Inquisition's a good one. There's a great documentary, which I haven't been able to find since I watched it. The Spanish Inquisitors were not ruthless by medieval standards. They were all legally trained. They killed an estimated 2,000 people, I think, which is kind of up there with the state of Texas. And by medieval standards, they were as rational as anybody. And so the question is, where did it come from? Well, it turns out when Spain got in a war, someone passed around pamphlets talking about the evil inquisitors. And they actually know the pamphlets. They know of these pamphlets that got passed around. And then after that, every time someone went to war with Spain, the inquisitor story got dredged up. And so there's a thing called the Inquisitor Archive. They have something like 2 million documents in it.
Wow.
And with in the computer age, you can kind of work your way through it and archive it, because these old archives, like the Medici archives and the Inquisitor archives, some scholar would go in at 30 and come out at 70 and die and take what he learned with him, because it was just so bottomless. And now with computers and searching algorithms and stuff, you can kind of organize it. And the Inquisitor archives, there's this huge amount of information about what the Inquisition was all about. And and it's not to say there weren't bad popes and priests, and of course there were, right? I mean, I think the reason pedophilia is so strong in the church is because some guy who swears off sex, there's something not up there, right? There's a loose screw up there. Nobody does that. Biology shouldn't let you do that. I'm about to go to war on a little bit on the transgender movement.
Yeah, totally. I mean, especially.
Well, it's risky for me. I mean, I will have no support.
Yeah. We have a child. I mean, we have a daughter, a lovely daughter, 2.5 years old. And I'm like, I mean, thanks God, I should, I mean, because I lived 5 years in California, like a long time ago. And I said to my wife, Ava, it's like, let's just be happy that we are in Austria still. It's sort of like on top of a mountain, in a little house.
Biosphere-ish, right?
Yeah. But I'm like, what kind of world? Because we are like totally for homeschooling, and I mean kindergarten maybe, yeah, but they're trying, to encroach with all these agendas, and I mean it's fucking insane, Dave. I mean, what is it from the United Nations with its some kind of draft or ID swirling around, like showing what porn to fucking kids? I mean, are you guys? I mean,
I think this story is going to pass.
Okay,
but I just read an article this morning or last night that basically said that the UK is setting the age of transgender intervention at 7 years old. Right, that's just insane. So the two things about, first and foremost, I feel bad for people who actually think they're the opposite sex. Life can't be easy for them. It maybe it's gotten easier, but they've got to be tormented souls. And teenagers are tormented souls by definition. So you mix a teenager and transgenderism, you have like torment squared. Yeah. And so I have the deepest sympathy for the people who really are tormented by this. And at the same time, I can't sign off on two things. I can't sign off on totally screwing up women's sports. I coach 2 collegiate sports, amazingly enough, and women work their asses off, and just to end up getting whomped by some dude, it just doesn't make sense to me. Riley Gaines is out there fighting, power to her. She says that everybody who talks to her behind closed doors supports her, everybody, but they won't speak out. And I get it, because we watched it happen with the vaccine, right? I had to take the vax or lose my job, and I wasn't going to fall on that sword. So I'm guilty. And she said even the head of the NCAA said to her, keep up the good fight. And she said, but you're the guy I'm fighting. you're head of the NCAA. You're the guy I'm fighting, but he doesn't dare. So we watch women get sports. When I drive past a sporting event where women are out there smacking away, I'm going, this is great. And one of the sports I coached was Taekwondo. I was a minor level coach in that. And it was better for the women than the men. Mm-hmm. It was a more important contribution to their existence than it was for the men. We used to spar men on women. Now, you obviously don't clobber them, right? But you still mixed sex gender in there, but you don't compete against them. And you don't send guys in to take all the gold medals. And then on top of that, you start chemically castrating 7-year-olds.
Mutilating. Yeah.
Mutilating. Yeah. And then so here's what I think is going to happen. This will pass. When you have 60 or 70 kids in a single middle school who think they're transgender, this is not a health problem. This is a cultural movement.
Yeah.
And it will pass, just like everything does. But the problem is there are going to be a lot of detransitioners. There are people who are activists who view the young girls, young boys as trophies. These people should be beaten with a Louisville Slugger, in my opinion. I merciless.
Yeah.
I have no patience for them. There's no compassion there. It's all about activism for them. They're not worried about the kid. And then there's going to be this moment in the future where there's going to be kids saying to their parents, where were you when I needed you? Exactly. Yeah. Why did you let me do this?
Yeah.
Right. I needed a parent at that point in time, not a friend, not an activist.
Yeah. And that's called unconditional love when you have a child. I mean, people who have no children, they just can't fathom or comprehend.
But some of these have children. I just don't get it.
Oh my God, that's even beyond my imagination. But
it is. And talking about it on this podcast could get me in trouble, but I'll go to the wall on this one.
Oh, I know.
I'm ready. If Cornell wants to let a shit fit occur, I can handle it. I can just shut up, actually, if a shit fit occurs and Cornell doesn't do anything. If Cornell decides to make a case of it, then I'll go to war.
Were you the only one who, at least, raised concerns about, the vaccine, the injection, or were there other people who were like?
There were others. There was a kind of a network of people, but and I couldn't help them, and they weren't going to vaccinate, and they got fired. Wow. Now, what I don't know, and I'd love to know, is if there's any tenured faculty members who said hell no, and the university just turned a blind eye. Mm-hmm. And I would like to know that, but I don't right now know how to get that information.
Right. Do you think we will ever see justice? I mean, will there be like a Nuremberg trial with teeth, like a real Nuremberg without, because all the, the real responsible people who finance and everything else, they got away. I'm talking about like a real.
Here's what could happen. This Dr. Zoom group, they're always talking about, well, we should take this to the police. And I go, you got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. You think some cop, some sergeant at the desk of a police station is going to, and so, but then I ended up flipping, because what happened is the lawyers got into it and started making progress. And so you ever seen those dominoes where you start with a little one and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the whole, so it's a progressive domino fall where at the end the big one falls. I think you start out by suing someone relatively minor. So some guy who fired an employee because you didn't vaccinate, and you sue them, and they don't even have the resource to fight it, so that falls. Meanwhile, the lawyers start to learn how to win. Mm-hmm. They get better at it. They collect more information. They get a war chest brewing. The Dr. Zoom group has lawyers in it, and including some that people know. And these guys say, most recent was about 9 months ago. They said something like 16 or 20,000 lawsuits are out there right now.
Wow.
So these could start falling like dominoes, and the faster they fall, the story, the guy who invented intermittent windshield wipers, and all the car companies stole them. They just took them, and he spent 20 years fighting, and I would say it might not have been worth it, but he fought for 20 years, and then they started falling like dominoes, and the more they fell, the quicker they wanted to settle, and by the end, he had them begging for mercy, and we could have a cascading win like that. I would love to see Fauci taken to The Hague, tried for crimes against humanity, and executed.
But it doesn't stop there, Dave. I mean, we're talking about.
I know that would just be a nice victory.
Right. Definitely.
Rochelle Walensky. There's a whole bunch. There's layers to the onion. So I understand. I've asked medical professionals, and I get some of them fess up that the whole thing's screwed up, and others just don't go there. And I think, do they not know? And then I go, well, what they know is that if they start answering questions like that, they're going to get fired. So that it's just not worth engaging in that conversation. So. And then I dug into Lena Wen. Remember Lena Wen, the CNN expert?
Yeah. She's like.
I dug into her. I'm fairly convinced she's a CIA plant.
Yeah.
And that her, although she's at Harvard Medical School, that her entire resume has been fabricated. Not that they aren't real papers, is that they're really bad papers. And I started reading them, and they're just garbage. And they're garbagey enough that even though I'm not a biomedical guy, I can see they're garbage. And I'm pretty sure that a Harvard Medical School professor should be able to wow me with their biomedical intellect. And she did not wow me with her biomedical intellect in her papers. They were in elite journals. So I think her sisters, mainland Chinese, highly connected.
Yeah.
So I think Lena Wen, they've completely fabricated a career for and put her at Harvard Medical School. And
totally. And she's been spewing like propaganda and
she also was shown being interviewed by Chuck Todd or someone at the Boston Marathon bombing. Oh, how coincidental was that? Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So again, Whitney Webb's book is so overwhelming because it seems like almost every business and every bank and everything in the world is just a front for somebody.
Yeah.
And I'm also working on this basic theory that there's some quantity of money above which, by definition, organized crime is involved. And organized crime doesn't just mean a Sicilian mafia. It means the Clintons. It means, organized crime in the modern era.
Yeah. And the controllers of the monetary, structures. I would love to talk about it, but maybe next time. I mean, I'm not talking about like Rothschild. It's just a front organization, front face, or that, But there's some really like a bunch of small families that are. I mean, of course,
when someone seems to get caught, when someone seems like. So a question I asked in a recent podcast, can't remember which one, maybe Ben's podcast, was what percentage of the FBI is actually working on legitimate things?
Yeah, I'd love to know that.
And it could be none. It really could be none. And it could be that when the FBI sort of gets the bad guy, what they actually got was someone from one of the other families, the mob families, and I just have no faith in the FBI at all. And I'm sure there's guys working at the ground level, but, the Patriot Front looks like feds to me.
Yeah.
And to me, it's treasonous if feds are trying to stir up a race war. That's just treasonous to me. But the Patriot Front is farcically bad, in my opinion. So in that sense, maybe it's designed to stir up antagonism to the Patriot Front, right? I just don't know. But when you look at the guys, when they got arrested, and it was a complete sham. The arrest was a complete sham. And then you look at their mugshots, and so these supposed neo-Nazis, you look at their mugshots, not a single one had a tattoo, not a single one. Right, your image of a white supremacist, there'd be a few swastikas, there'd be a few lightning bolts up the neck, They also were physically fit. They really looked like, as Joe Rogan said, the 101st Airborne. And so I don't know why they're doing all this. What they did do recently, the Patriot Front showed up and a bunch of MAGA guys started pulling their masks off. I don't know if you saw that. And that was great, unmasked. So when those Patriot Front boys show up, start pulling their masks off. Get those faces out in the public. Let's identify those bastards.
Mm-hmm.
If they're real neo-Nazis, go for it. Take them out. I don't care. But if they're feds, I want to know.
Yeah.
I sleep night way better knowing there's a bunch of neo-Nazis out there than a bunch of feds pretending to be neo-Nazis. Like the feds pretending to be. My Twitter feed at one point got invaded by feds.
Mm-hmm.
When I publicly denounced remember the Skripal poisoning, where the Skripals got poisoned by a nerve agent, and I called them liars. And the first time I did, it didn't catch, and the second time, all of a sudden, it caught. Just one of those viral moments or something. Next thing I know, I'm doing multiple George Galloway shows and getting calls from Al Jazeera and Russia Today and stuff like that. Yeah, and I just said, look. The nerve agent that supposedly is uniquely Russian technology could be made in a sophomore chem lab. They'd probably die because they don't know how to handle it, but the technology is trivial. And then I put it on an exam. I taught a course in organic synthesis, and I put the structure on the exam, and the question said, look, I got into a bit of an international scuffle over this nerve agents that said uniquely Russian technology. I said, here's what you do. You got to make it from POCl3, which is a chemical, and you got to do it in 3 steps. How do you do it? And they all got full credit. It's that trivial. I think you could take the 4 ingredients of the Novichok nerve gas, and I think you could mix them together into a punch bowl and end up with enough toxicity to kill a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It is that simple.
Mm-hmm.
And let alone doing it in a way that a chemist would do it. And so that then, and no organic chemists were calling them out. I think that I heard one guy who happens to be a friend of mine out there say something, but then eventually the Porton Down guys, who are the nerve experts in Great Britain, who happen to be 8 miles away from where the Skripals got poisoned, kind of Wuhan-y flavored here, and that is awfully coincidental. And the Porton Down guys said, no, we can't say it's Russian technology, because I said that every country in the world has chemists who are qualified to make this nerve agent, period. And I don't know. It strikes me as possible that they were sort of watching me calling them out, and they said, we're not going to stand behind this one because we're going to get burned on this. Uh-huh. But I was, best I could tell, I was the only one calling bullshit on that story. And I have fun doing that stuff. Yeah.
Did you hear about that Chinese so-called Chinese laboratory in California? What is that?
I have no idea what to make of it. I have no idea. I looked at the lab. It looked like just a standard lab to me. It didn't look like some garage. It looked like a laboratory. Had, sort of Fisher scientific benches, sort of things. It looked well equipped. And for all I know, it's completely fabricated. Completely unadulterated garbage to make us hate the Chinese, to make us, let's go after those evil demons. Mm-hmm. Right? And then there's some like 46 bioweapons labs in Ukraine. And the Pentagon and Victoria Nuland admitted it, which shocked me. Mm-hmm. And the question is, why have bioweapons labs in Ukraine? And the answer is, well, the simpleton answer, not the simpleton, you have to be a moron to buy this answer, is that they're leftovers from the Soviet Union. Well, I read Demon in the Freezer about 25 years ago that talked about the challenges that the former Soviet labs pose. We were on it. We were afraid of those labs. And so we got in there fast and said, look, let us help you deal with your friggin' labs. And so we didn't leave Soviet era labs unaccounted for.
Yeah.
So why would you have a bioweapons lab in Ukraine? And the answer is, well, first of all, it's got to be offshore. Second of all, you need a country that's first world enough that you can support a lab. Right? You put it in Nigeria, they probably don't have electricity half the time. And so you need the first world support. While you also need third world country because you can't do bioweapons laboratory work on rats. Right? If you're going to say, oh, we got to be able to kill people, you got to have people to kill.
Yeah. And you know, they found all this organ harvesting. I mean, horrendous. I mean, the organ harvesting facilities in Ukraine and with all the babies. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
And we don't seem to call out Zelensky on that one. Right?
So that's just a puppet. But who's controlling? Who do you think else is besides the oligarch? Is that like a special group? I mean, you know, we got the free land and the new land.
Well, it's a bunch of crime families, right? I mean, they're all interconnected. You're frozen. I don't know if you can see me, but you're frozen.
I'm frozen. Can you still hear me? See me? What about now? Oh, you're gone now. That's weird. Okay, maybe we shouldn't have talked about it. I'm not sure. Dave, are you back? It's black. I have a black picture, black screen. You can't hear me? Can you hear me again?
I can. Whose computer did it? Was that me?
Some keywords we shouldn't have mentioned, probably. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. There are times where I get the feeling. I was talking to a guy on the phone the other day, and all of a sudden a female voice came on and basically shut off the call. I didn't hear it, but he heard it. Now, it was a protracted conversation, one that was too protracted. We might have just timed out.
Yeah,
I've never been on the phone long enough to time out. This one was this guy. But the guy is, he says he has great information he's going to send me on nefarious things. I'm being set up. They're going to
have a network of sources.
smash my door. And by the way, if I ever commit suicide, I didn't do it.
No, suicidal.
I'm not suicidal.
No, we're gonna.
Let me put it this way: if I ever commit suicide, I'm leaving a manifesto. Okay, it's gonna be a good one. I will write something real good.
Bestseller. Definitely bestseller.
Yeah, I will call them out. By the way, if I ever commit suicide, I'm going to take some of the bad guys with me.
No, man, Dave, we need more, investigative journalists, researchers, and think tanks like you and Whitney Webb. I'm just hoping.
But I'm secondhand. I just am an aggregator. Whitney does investigative journalism. I'm just an aggregator.
You connect the dots, I mean,
but we shouldn't be putting the same sentence together. Here's a funny story, and you might have heard it from a previous podcast, but I was listening to the Tim D show, and they were talking about Tucker getting fired. It's a pretty big show, apparently. And he gets to the end and he says, well, what's that mean for Fox? They all agreed it just means they're now CNN, so they're garbage. And then he said, okay, with Tucker gone, what conservative voices do we need to hear more about? And he turns to the chick, her name is Savage or something. She says, well, I'm going to go way outside the box. I'm going with Dave Collum at Cornell. And I go, oh, you got to be kidding. So I said it to my family. I said, go to the 43-minute mark. You're gonna have fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So what it's done is it's caused me to think about the answer to the question, but my answer does not include Dave Collum. But I realize that most of the people I think of are former liberals.
Yeah.
And so the liberals have successfully crossed the midline and gotten pretty reasonable, in my opinion. I'm not so sure about the conservatives.
Dave, you have a substantial, number of followers, and you'd be great, like, to having, like, 15, 30 minutes, like, on a regular basis on Twitter or whatever it's called now, X, on a platform where you.
I think I'd wear people down fast. I really. people say you should have a podcast. I interject. I'm an interjector. And the podcast host can't be too much of an interjector. So I don't think I'd be a good podcaster. One time I set up a podcast with Joe Saluzzi and I'm gonna draw a blank, but he's a famous guy. Oh God. In any event, and there was a host, and I thought he was going to run the podcast. He just turned over to me, and I wasn't ready. And so we chatted, but no, I don't think I'd be a good podcast host. And I think I'm okay in small doses.
Yeah. No, but it's always good, people get like a more of a general overview, a holistic overview or analysis of, range of topics,
One of the reasons I'm going to write about the pedophilia is because I want people to just know of the possibility. And I write about stuff where when I start writing, I don't know where it's going to go. So I start writing. Stephen King, suppose, used to write his novels that way, where he said he didn't know the finish. The problem is when you read one of his novels, you go, yeah, it shows, dude, your finish sucked. But I wrote about Roe v. Wade and about some of the legal principles underneath it and stuff like that. And I basically wrote about it to see where my writing would take me. Right. And that seems to work pretty well. Just write until you get to the end of what
it's a process. You let it sit, you sleep over it, and then you redraft it,
And then you start seeing the puzzle pieces go together.
Right.
What I will tell the audience that although I'm a huge fan of Whitney Webb, her books are a tough read.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I love the second one, by the way. The first one was really exhausting, but the second one was much more thrilling and, sort of more the bigger picture.
And I think it's because we know the players in the second volume.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping. So I got through the first volume, and it was painfully detailed about an era in history, which I don't. So you go, so-and-so was CEO of this company. I go, I don't even know that company existed. And then the second one, all of a sudden you start hearing names of people who are familiar, and you go, okay. So that's one of the things I found is there's subjects where, like medieval history, the more you read, the more interesting it gets. Yeah. Because when 9/11 occurred, I must have read a half a dozen books on the Middle East, and it didn't work because it would take way more than that for me to have this sort of structural framework to understand the Middle East. And I sort of came to the conclusion that I joined the ranks of the bazillions who do not understand the Middle East. But I tried really hard, but it was just, it would be like trying to learn Mandarin or something, it just takes so much work to get but medieval history, you've got a kind of a working framework that maybe I got from taking high school social studies or something. I don't know, but
I understand. Okay.
A little bit more. It's like you need a Christmas tree to hang the ornaments off, right? And if you have to grow the tree, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
So in any case, Whitney's book is, as Rudy Havasi said, is more of a reference book in some sense.
Big shout out to her. One Nation Under Blackmail. Maybe we should just mention it. One Nation Under Blackmail.
But it's brilliant.
It's brilliant. I mean, she put a lot of work.
I can't even imagine how much work she put into it. I just can't imagine. By the way, also she has a daughter who's very, very sick.
Yeah.
And so some of her stress that we picked up in the PDB podcast might have actually been sort of personally driven, right? Could have been the life's been tough.
Her ex-partner now is this Johnny Vetmore. I mean, I don't know what to think about this guy, but anyway, it's Johnny Vetmore. I think that's her ex-partner now. She was together with.
I didn't know that. Oh, so she's got just a mess and a half on her hands. So I wish you well, Whitney, if you happen to hear this. I occasionally chat with her digitally, and it's such a privilege to be able to occasionally pose a question or something. I'm locked and loaded on one or two questions about, for example, this idea of not understanding what you're seeing. We lost 4 banks, right? So we lost Silicon Valley Bank. We lost a couple others, which are not as memorable. And then no others. That seems very odd. And
Yeah.
say, well, Silicon Valley Bank was run really poorly. I go, oh yeah, they bought too many treasuries. What kind of crazy world is that? They say, well, they should have hedged. I go, I know, but bankers, you wouldn't know how to run a bank in the current monetary climate. It's just too hard when the interest rates are whipping around like this. So I don't blame Silicon Valley Bank. What I do think is possible is that these banks are collapsing CIA fronts or something. And so what you do is you collect all this money and then you dump it into all your favorite targets. And then when it fails, the Fed bails out the depositors and you start over again. So who lost in the Silicon Valley Bank? And undoubtedly it's the taxpayers. So everything looks to me like a grift to get taxpayer money into the hands of bad people. And FTX collapse last year was precisely that. FTX was a money laundering operation that had ties through Ukraine.
And they got away. Sam, what do you call it? Friedman, whatever.
Sam Bankman-Fried or
biggest
Sam
donor.
Bankrupt Fraud is another way. By the way, I bet you he's not even going to do jail time. I think they're starting to drop charges on him left and right.
Yeah.
Because they don't think they want that shit going through court. Just like they don't want Hunter Biden shit going through court.
Yeah.
And so Mr. Bankrupt Fraud, he was laundering money through Ukraine. That money was commandeered from government sources and then funneled back to the DNC using cryptos and shit like that. And it feels to me like right now the Democrats are more corrupt than the Republicans. That could be a terrible latent bias of mine. But I'm having a terrible time identifying Republicans who look as deeply flawed as the Democrats right now. And I don't know if someone could tell me why I'm missing the point.
If do Republicans have different values? I mean, seriously,
well, it could be. That's a generous interpretation, right? My other theory being that they're all corrupt sort of is inconsistent with that. It could be their role playing, and right now their role is not to be corrupt. I don't know. What I do know is no one's going to challenge the election that reelected them. Right. So with a 26% approval rating on a good day and a 97% reelection rate, who's going to question the elections, right? I think it's very clear that the Republicans didn't want Trump in there either, so they're not going to do anything.
Right.
In fact, one year I wrote about the COVID payouts, and I sort of scavenged up all the cases I could find of family members of politically connected politicians who got big payouts for COVID. And the first thing I noticed is they were all Republicans. I go, that doesn't look good for the Republicans, right? That their families are getting the money. And then I noticed they were all in the border states of the 2020 election.
Wow.
I go, well, maybe it's not connected, but maybe someone got bribed to shut the hell up, right? Look, we'll give your family a ton of money if you just shut up while we take Trump down to the studs.
Yeah, I don't know what to think. I mean, sometimes I'm like, what to believe is like Republican, Democrat, all this. I mean, it's a cesspool of, Jesus, of so much corruption, criminality. It's beyond our, we just know a fraction of a percentage, what we know. I wanted to I want to respect your time, Dave. Just want to talk about shortly about CBDCs and, what do you see sort of a dystopian future with CBDCs coming and also about the BRICS, there's a date, the 22nd of August, there's a big declaration coming. Who knows, what's going to come out of it. But do you want to give a bigger picture? Like, what do you see on the horizon?
Well, I think the CBDCs are unstoppable. That's my guess, right? And I think they have the potential of doing horrific damage.
Yeah.
Because of the idea that it'll give central banks unlimited power to destroy their currencies, but also it gives authoritarian, totalitarian control over the populace. Now, What I don't know is if that's necessarily what will happen, but the potential will be there. So what people don't understand is that CBDCs are programmable. Most people who listen to this probably do understand this because they're obviously on social media and things like that. But the CBDCs can be programmed to the point where when you get your paycheck, some quantity of it is usable for food, some quantity of it's usable for beer, some quantity usable for housing, and they can cut off or reallocate however the hell they want. If the government decides, for example, to stimulate the housing market, they'll allocate more for housing, right? That sort of thing. That's a very authoritarian state. That's the best model that's akin to the old mining towns where they paid you in corporate chits that could only be used in the store in the town where the mine was. And so you had no escape routes. You couldn't save because you couldn't build up cash. And so CBDCs could become totalitarianism real fast. I just don't know if they're going to, or if that's just the worst case scenario.
Right. And if you could connect it with all the dystopian, technocratic, super surveillance monitoring, I mean, this is like pure technocratic dystopian slavery. I mean,
the problem is we tend to think that somehow in the modern age, we've gotten smart enough to avoid this crap.
Yeah.
I say we, because I sure don't at this point. But if you look through history, we've slaughtered human beings at every turn. And so there is no reason when people say, how could someone fly planes into the Twin Towers? How could they do that? And I go, well, the same guys who made that call are maybe the ones who would have had to have dropped, 20,000 soldiers to their death on Omaha Beach. If you say, look, we're going to lose 3,000 to 5,000 people, but it'll get us into the Middle East where we got to get to, you go, well, that's the price of it. That's the price we pay. And so it's just not 9/11 is at least easy to explain.
Yeah.
It's hard to fathom for some people, but usually those are the people who have not actually paid attention. So if someone's listening is going, what are you talking about? I urge you to go to YouTube or Rumble and find the documentary, The New Pearl Harbor. It's about 3.5 hours long, I think. It's got everything there. If you can watch The New Pearl Harbor and come out of it thinking that you understand thinking 9/11 was just Arabs, you're either a better or worse person than me. I don't know which.
Yeah, I mean, on the other hand, you can't start off talking about energy-directed weapons because it's just too much to handle for people. But this is what I'm convinced of, because you see the towers pulverizing. It's pulverizing. I mean,
right. Actually, for me, so Building 7 is the go-to, no way that fell correctly, right? And I have no trouble with that. I think an even better case is the fact that the Pentagon was hit by a plane that there's not a single shred of footage showing it flying in, even though we had 45 minutes notice that it was coming. There's no footage. Then people say, well, where's the plane then, Mr. Smarty Pants? I don't know, the fucking Atlantic Ocean? I don't know. I don't need to come up with the correct theory to know that what's being told is bullshit. That's the key. It takes a lot of work to actually figure out what did happen. It is way easier to figure out that what they're telling us didn't happen. Right. And so once you wrap your brain around 9/11, and I didn't even know about it until probably 2007. And then a physicist friend of mine sent me footage of Building 7 falling. I go, holy shit, that's not right. I don't know how you can watch Building 7 collapse and think it's normal. So once you accept 9/11, then all of a sudden your Overton window got thrown wide open. And you still have to pry it further if you go down the spirit cooking satanic cult rabbit hole. But here's what I'll tell you is there's prominent people who openly have dinner parties in which they pretend to eat cadavers and babies and things like that. And their art is twisted. Their art's so bad. The Tony Podesta art collection is so bad that if you Google it, and they've scrubbed a lot of it from Google, so you got to go down a ways, but you see just twisted stuff.
Yeah.
And you go, I'm not sure I should have this Google page up on my computer. It's that twisted. Yeah, it's you wonder if you're not going to have the feds burst through the door and say you got perverted art on your computer, right?
It's really fucked up. I mean, I don't even want to look at that. I don't even look at
it's satanic creatures with babies strapped on their backs in cages. It's children in their underwear chained together. And this is Tony Podesta. This is, John Podesta's brother, a lobbyist, Hillary Clinton's, buddy. This is real. Spirit cooking, this idea of eating bodies. Now, it is undeniably true that people pretend to do it. What we don't know is if they actually do it.
Yeah, or this whole adrenochrome, which actually they mentioned it in interviews. Jim Caviezel in his interviews. I mean, it's an open secret now. They do it. They for whatever reason.
So the adrenochrome is what they use to hammer Caviezel with, to say, oh, he's so nuts, he believes in adrenochrome. For those who don't know, the claim is that the satanic bastards actually kill children, torture them under excruciating and suffering and excruciating death. The idea being that I think it's your adrenal gland kicks out vast quantities of shit that you then drink the blood and it rejuvenating, right? You go, is
that what they expect? Is that really what they?
I don't know. I don't even know if they do it. I don't know if it's some internet. But what is true is they pretend to do it.
They look fucking
unambiguously. They pretend to do it.
Yeah, because withdrawal symptoms. I don't know. They don't look good. These people. I don't know.
So let me just do a quick experiment to see what people will find here. But if you search spirit cooking on Google, of course, everyone's Google is different. But let's search spirit cooking. I'm not hitting the really, really gruesome shit, although I think if you clicked on the links, you'd find it. But there's this Marina
Abramovich.
Abramovich.
Also, friends sort of with the Rothschilds. Abramovich, yeah.
Is she a Rothschild?
No, but she's friends. I always see her on some pictures with the Rothschild, with this old, white, pale Rothschilds, with these really sickening so-called art pictures, and
but also there's pictures of Hollywood elite standing around this cadaver like they're about to eat it, right? Hollywood elite, these are famous actors. Yeah. And I'm going, if I were Hollywood elite, you would not catch me dead near that get together, because just the concept of it is so twisted. And I remember I used to read about people who ate the placenta of their child.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, frying up a placenta is pretty sick. But okay, spirit cooking, a Google search on spirit cooking came up not totally gruesome, although no trouble you would find the articles with the gruesome shit in it. But it's real. They do pretend to eat bodies, and therefore they are twisted bastards by any metric, right?
But these so-called Hollywood celebrities, do you think they're groomed into it, or MK controlled, or
one of the claims is by several Hollywood elites is that their career wasn't moving until they signed off on it. Until they actually have to sort of join the church of holy shit. And that's part of the compromising process. And then there's things like Corey Feldman running around telling the world that there's pedophilia all over Hollywood. Now it turns out his buddy Corey Haim supposedly got raped repeatedly and killed himself. And Elijah Wood concurred that there was pedophilia, and then he recanted. But if you read anything about these sort of things, the recanting is usually at gunpoint. And so Corey Feldman is not naming names yet because he's made a documentary. And he says, look, I need people to see the documentary. And if I name the names, then they won't go. And so he was on The View one day and he mentioned the pedophilia. And this was so stunning to me. He mentioned the pedophilia in Hollywood. And it was when Barbara Walters was on The View.
Yeah.
And Barbara Walters, what would be logical? Well, you'd say, oh boy, that's really awful. Let's go to commercial. And then you say to Corey, would you please shut up, right? Don't go there. This is a family show, right? Don't go there. And but that's not what she did. She attacked him. And I'm watching it going, why is she attacking them? Well, it turns out that I'm reading one of my books, and it turns out that Barbara Walters was tight, as in they used to joke about them being married tight with Roy Cohn, who was one of the biggest sexual blackmailers of the 20th century. He trained Jeffrey Epstein. He made Jeffrey Epstein look like a piker.
What about Donald Trump? Was Roy Cohn a sort of a?
I'm having trouble figuring out Trump's relationships with these guys. So he's crossed paths with them. I haven't found smoking guns that make Trump. So the claim is Trump was that Roy Cohn was Trump's mentor.
Yeah, I think, did we read that in One Nation on the Blackmail? Was that in?
Well, I'm still working my way through volume 2, so I might be short of that part, so I don't know. But what I do know is that getting photographed with badasses doesn't make you a badass.
Yeah, yeah.
Because all these guys are running in the powerful circles and
parties.
You can't be rich and powerful without occasionally running across badass rich and powerful types. And so I won't convict a person due to association unless the association is like 28 flights on the Lolita Express, like Clinton, right?
Right.
I have no doubt the Clintons have whacked political opponents. The death toll question seems unambiguous to me. The Vince Foster case, by the way, Whitney just went through that case, and it's compelling. I mean, Vince got whacked, and he just knew too much. And Michael Hastings and Seth Rich, and these guys are getting whacked left and right. Kevin Spacey got accused by 4 people.
He got acquitted, huh? In UK. What's that UK? The trial in UK. I mean, and all these witnesses, they just got suicided, or I don't know, or dead, or
So 3 out of the 4 people who accused Kevin Spacey of bad behavior ended up dead, and the 4th said, I'm good, I'm out. Don't worry about me, I'm done. Which you would do, right? And so he goes on the list of badasses. There's a picture of Ghislaine Maxwell and Kevin Spacey sitting in a cabin.
Yeah, of the Queen, right?
Of the Queen, the Queen's cabin, sitting on the throne. This of course could just be their ties to Prince Andrew, who seems unambiguously a perv. And why he's still in the royal family when Prince Harry is not, I don't know. I don't understand. But I just don't know how deep it goes. This is the thing. I mean, these could be anecdotes.
Yeah, this is what I was saying in the beginning. I was like, okay, I finally got the truth. We've had the truth, but it goes deeper and deeper. It goes even beyond even my imagination of evilness.
Well, so I read there's a documentary on the Franklin scandal, which is a lousy documentary. It's a very low grade documentary, and therefore, if you watch it, you go, who knows what this crap is, right? The Clinton Chronicles, by the way, were equally low grade, but they told a compelling story of Clinton in Arkansas. But in any event, there's a book, The Franklin Scandal, and I found it to be compelling. I thought the author did a great job. And it's a pedophile ring in Omaha, Nebraska, that doesn't seem that broadly based, although there's stories of ritual sacrifice and crap like that, and flying kids around the country to be rented out. But it seems relatively small in scale. But what's staggering about the Franklin scandal is the incredible intervention of the feds to shut it down.
Yeah.
So the chief of police turned out to be the first wall of defense, but he was one of the pervs, so that didn't work. The attorney general of the state of Nebraska shut it down. The FBI came in and completely annihilated all the witnesses.
Yeah. That's what I was saying, Dave, in the beginning. It's like prosecutors, judges, lawyers,
That's
politicians,
right.
legislation.
That's right.
I mean, everybody in those circles is involved in some way or another, or somehow.
Well, or they're just so aware of how deep the corruption is, they just go, I'm not touching it, right? So it's like herd immunity, right? You don't have to vaccinate everyone. You just have to vaccinate. You have to get the vaccination up to a high enough density that it doesn't propagate. And so if you own people in very high places and scattered throughout the system, you can always find a way to tell someone don't go there, right?
Yeah.
And I read Poisoner in Chief, which is about the MK Ultra program, which until I would say a year and a half ago, I thought was true, but probably highly glamorized and probably overstated. And then I found out that no, it was actually quite a large scandal in the early 70s. I just didn't know about it. It was sort of above the fold stories about the bad shit they did, real Dr. Mengele crap.
Yeah.
And it came out because I read the book Chaos, which 3 people told me to read. Otherwise I wouldn't have. It's about Charles Manson, and it turns out the book connects him to the CIA, and all the Dayton Bianca murders were CIA driven, and they connect him to a guy named Jolly West, who turns out to be MK Ultra Boston Division kingpin. And he connects up with Manson, and all the things that didn't make sense to the author of didn't make sense. But then he starts making other connections with Jolly West, and it turns out Jolly West had ties with the Oklahoma City bombing. Jolly West had ties with, and the author said, this is a lead that I did not want to find and I did not want to go down, but I found it and I had to go down. And it turns out Jolly West inserted himself into the Jack Ruby trial.
I see. Makes sense.
You're going, holy Jesus Christ, this Jolly West guy's a badass.
Yeah.
And so I think MK Ultra, Ted Kaczynski was MK Ultra. I thought Ted Kaczynski was MK Ultra going bad. I now think that Ted Kaczynski was MK Ultra playing out.
Oh.
Right. So if you're doing mind control shit, Ted Kaczynski is an experiment.
Yeah.
And I think the shootings in the schools, some percentage of them are MK Ultra like things. I don't know what percentage, could be 80. I don't think it's 10. I think a lot of these shootings are drug-addled teens who've been coerced in various ways to do bad things. And there's common denominators to all the shootings that don't make sense, like all their hard drives end up missing and things like that. So I think this, and the CIA is founded on. The CIA and intelligence are founded on organized crime. So we know that organized crime played a role in things like World War II. The Sicilian mob helped soften the target for invading Sicily or whatever. But it turns out that organized crime was tied to the US government before the CIA was founded. They founded the CIA using organized crime as the pillars. So the CIA was criminal enterprises from day one.
Yeah, and then you got the Operation Paperclip, Nazi, whatever, scientists and
That's
whatever,
right.
and people into the OSS. It wasn't the precursor of the CIA.
Yes, and so everyone knows about the German scientists we brought over, which makes total sense. We go, okay, well, let's go get the scientists. Well, it turns out we brought all the Dr. Mengele type doctors too, and we put them in Fort Detrick and put them on payroll and had them teach us everything they knew about torturing people and what they had learned from their days in the German concentration camps. And whether or not we got Mengele himself seems to be up for discussion. I thought it was put to rest that he didn't make it because he was too visibly important. They had to off him. But then I recently ran into a case where they think he came in under a pseudonym. And so in any event, we brought the worst of the worst out of Germany.
Right.
Put them on payroll here. So
on a positive note,
I think the CIA is completely rogue, though. I don't think the head. I had dinner with the head of the CIA once.
Really?
He's a douchebag of a higher order, unimaginable, actually. But it was fun to have dinner with him. And I don't think the head of the CIA has any idea what the CIA is doing.
Because it's so compartmentalized, right?
Yeah, sleeper cells, right? Because you can't afford to have an intelligence agency where the whole thing unravels because somebody gets caught by the Soviets, right? I'm not convinced the Soviets and MI5, MI6, Mossad, I'm not convinced they even are independent of each other. I know they work together and talk and things like that, but I'm not even convinced they're not just part of one organization, right?
You know, I had a bunch of other questions, but I don't want to take up your time. I was asking about this whole alien because I've been researching a lot about compartmentalized military industrial technologies, and forget the aliens, forget everything else. I think it's a lot of distraction, but yep. I think I want to jack up somehow the Space Force and or maybe as a last joker, false flag, alien invasion. I don't know, maybe the system is so fucked up, Dave, that they have no other ammunition, so to wrap it up with, what do you think about this whole I don't know, this whole theater with
well, the alien story is, in my opinion, one of two things. One is just a big distraction.
Yeah. So thank you.
While we're talking about aliens, we're not talking about laptops, things like that. We're not talking about pedophiles.
No, it's about the technology, actually. But anyway, yeah.
I don't think aliens who have the technology to get here across the vast expanses of space, which really essentially defies the laws of physics as we know it.
As we know it, yeah.
Right. So we have no inkling of technology that could get us to cross that vast expanse of space.
Not officially.
If they can do it, they are so advanced they couldn't give less of a shit about us. We're just ants. We are at best the planet that was discovered that has life on it, right? And I don't think they're here. I don't think they covered the vast expanse. I think they're out there. I have no doubt they're out there, but I don't think they get here. And so, and they sure as hell aren't going to anthropomorphically flying spaceships and shit that look just like ours, right? And oh yeah, that thing. Look how fast that thing's moving. And no, it's going to be an otherworldly technology that would be like an ant crossing a highway and not recognizing that he's actually crossing a highway. And I think that's what it would be. So it would take a lot to convince. Put it this way, I would sign off on the fake moon landing a lot faster than aliens.
Yeah,
a lot faster than aliens. And that's not a way up on my list but I don't rule it out, but it's not way up on my list.
Yeah. But do you think since the 40s, 50s, a lot of trillions and trillions have been pouring into the compartmentalized, highly secretive military industrial development of whatever technologies which we cannot even fathom, and which
yes,
right.
I think. I remember probably 30 years ago, some guy who was in the Air Force was telling me what the planes could do, and it was kind of shocking to me. And in retrospect, I said, well, of course they can do that, but if the pilot blacks out, the plane flies home, that sort of thing. But that was way back when that kind of technology wasn't above the fold.
Exactly.
So yeah, I got to figure if we could see everything they knew, we'd be staggered by the technology that's available. I don't think there's a shred of Silicon Valley that isn't under control of one or more intelligence agencies. And even if many of them started with funding from the intelligence agencies. So I think one of the reasons I'm not a crypto guy is because I think that's all part of the game. And
Bitcoin. I mean, crypto is shit. But have you changed?
I'm not a Bitcoin guy. I could be converted to one. I've talked about this many times. But the reason I'm not is one of the many is that if Bitcoin is a deep state construct, then I will be the last sucker in the pool before they throw the toaster oven in. So a simple model is that Bitcoin was supposedly the first white paper on Bitcoin, the first one that made reference to a cryptocurrency and made reference to coins and things like that was an NSA paper authored by 3 guys, supposedly.
Yeah.
And so I could imagine you say, well, look, let's throw it out there. Let's crowdsource the kinks out of the system. Let's let the crazies who do this sort of thing for fun sort of develop it, and then when it comes time, we'll just step on it and take what they learned and use it to our advantage. So I think we could be sourcing Bitcoin for the authorities.
Oh, okay.
And
in case the
it
whole
means
system
we will
crash.
become, it's like the FBI informants at January 6th who think they're part of the plot and they don't realize they're about to be written out of it.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because if you're an FBI informant and you're at January 6th and you think, oh, what they won't arrest me because I'm working with them. Well, they'll happily put you in jail. They don't care about you. And so you got to make sure you're not the sucker sitting at the table, not understanding that you're the sucker sitting at the table.
Yeah. But
And
there are
Bitcoin
some
could be
Bitcoins.
that. That's one of my concerns. So
Because there's some Bitcoins, I mean, who do say, yeah, sure, it could have come out of the whatever Intel, NSA, whatever, scene, but then it got out of hand, and then it got sort of totally decentralized and for the good.
Well, Rudy in our podcast said what I've said many, many times. How will Bitcoin do if the authorities say, and after January 6th, and watching Julian Assange, and watching the things that the authorities will do, you say that's unconstitutional. I go, we don't care. We don't care. Because we're an authoritarian state, right? We pretend to be a democracy, but we're an authoritarian state. So what will happen if people have Bitcoin and the authorities say you're going to do 10 years in jail if you use it?
Well, then then we have totally other worries and concerns. I mean, then
right. But it also, if you've got, at that point, the question is, will you say, I'm glad I have Bitcoin, or do I wish I had gold?
That makes total sense what you're saying. Yeah.
Or do I wish I just had a house that had sort of concrete value or something like that? And so I agree that we've got huge problems if they do that, except for the fact that, they did it with the vaccine.
Right. And they could say,
it's
the only currency that, that it's lawful. I mean, that's legal,
For now.
Right.
When you start hearing about drug runners using it, then it's time to duck. And so I'm just watching it, entertained by it. But I have no doubt that they will step on us like ants when the time comes. Right? You wouldn't have believed that they would do to the January 6th guys that they did.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have believed that they would be able to shut down the discussion of the vaccine the way they did.
Right.
People would be fired from their jobs in medical schools for saying the vaccine doesn't seem like a good idea. Right? I never would have believed that. I would say, the system has checks and balances.
Right.
But it doesn't. The checks and balances are long since gone. And
it's gone. I mean, there is no checklist. There is no constitution. They're
only there when they don't care, right? So, but if the highest powers decide something is not going to happen, it's not going to happen.
Right. But final question, Dave. I mean, if just on a positive note, if Donald, let's just say, Donald Trump is one of the good ones, and he really wants to, transform the country and, save the Constitution and whatever, and just bring sanity back. I mean, do you think he would, he would just clean up with a military tribunal or?
I don't know. So here's my Donald Trump analysis. That is, Donald Trump started his presidential run with what I would call a very shallow, raw narcissism. He just more microphone, right? And just more fun, more Trump everywhere, more ego massaging. I think over the presidency, Donald Trump's narcissism never went away, but his narcissism caused him to conclude that he wanted to be one of the greats.
Okay.
You can't be one of the greats just by being a blowhard.
Right.
So
but with an ethical,
he figured out that if he can transform the United States into something in his image, then he's one of the greats. So I think his narcissism has driven him to figure out what it takes to be one of the greats. That's my generous interpretation of Donald Trump.
Makes total sense. Yeah.
But then, if that's true, then they will do everything they can to stop him.
Stop him.
Did you hear the story that by indicting him on his intent to commit election fraud or something, that they opened the door to him being able to now defend himself by
and subpoena everybody, and like the whole thing is just helping him, actually, isn't it? I mean,
well, and then the question is, were they really that stupid, or did someone hold that door open?
That's a good question. What do you think?
I just don't have an opinion yet. I do know the indictments look stupid. Incredibly stupid.
Incredibly stupid. I mean, it's all in the open now. It's like so obvious now. It's
it's helped him. It's really kind of entertaining to watch, and he can get elected in prison, then pardon himself. I mean,
right.
They won't get him. It takes so long to put someone in prison. Look how long it took Elizabeth Holmes to be put in prison, who's also, by the way, a CIA operative.
Yeah.
It took years to put her in prison. So if Trump wants to stay out of prison until the election, he can do it. And then as soon as he's elected, he can pardon himself, I think.
You think they're going to provoke a civil war? I mean,
Well, I'm not thrilled by a world in which Donald Trump has to be brought back. I really would rather, I'd rather see Kennedy get elected.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
On a lot of points,
I don't think he can survive it. I really don't think they'll let him be president at any cost.
Yeah.
And so it would be great, but at this point, I don't know.
Well, if they want to make a marcher out of him, I don't know. That's a good idea. Yeah.
Senator Johnson, I trust. There's a couple.
Yeah.
I think Johnson's a good guy. I don't know too many. Rand Paul has grown on me. I didn't like him at first because I thought he was a poser. I thought he was trying to imitate his dad, but didn't know how to do it. But the battle scars have strengthened him. So I could become a Rand Paul advocate very quickly. I still would like to see Tulsi Gabbard on someone's ticket, even though there are little hints of things to worry about. But there's little hints of things to worry about all the candidates. So you're looking for the perfect candidate, you're gonna be waiting a long time. And I don't have an opposition to DeSantis. I don't know what to make of him. I'm still watching.
I don't know. I don't trust DeSantis anymore. I don't know.
There's something about him. There's something that's not.
He's like this and that. He's going in every direction, and then.
Well, I also think he's flailing because it's not working.
Yeah.
So if he's flailing, debating Newsom, that's the consolation round. Those two guys are going to take third and fourth place. They're debating who's going to take third. Right? Neither's going to get the nomination unless something happens to Biden, which I think, by the way, might. I guess if I had to bet, if it was not Biden, I would bet that Big Mike Obama would potentially be the nominee.
What a nightmare. Oh my God. Fool you once, fool me twice. Where did it go?
Well, the reason she'd get a lot of votes, A, chick, B, black, C, you get Barack for free.
Yeah.
A lot of people would like to see Barack come back. So all of a sudden you get the behind the scenes. It's like having Dick Cheney as your vice president, right?
Right.
And I've heard from someone who knows, someone who claims to know, she has no interest in campaigning. And so one of the things they could be doing is stalling long enough to allow her to come in at the 12th hour.
Okay.
If she has to come in now, she's got to campaign her ass off.
Yeah.
So, and I'm pretty sure that nobody wants Kamala.
No, she's so fucking stupid.
Yeah, I know.
Didn't make a career.
In fact, one of my friends who's met her said there's stupid and then there's Kamala. It's just
all species, but oh my God.
She's not as stupid as Fetterman.
Yeah.
Right. So the Democrats seem to be uniquely capable of picking horrific candidates for various positions. So someone was talking, they like to bitch about Trump's administration, but you look at at Biden's, and the level of incompetence is just staggering.
Mhm.
And someone like Tony Blinken is repugnant. Merrick Garland was a candidate for the Supreme Court. Look at him now. He has no respect for the Constitution, none whatsoever. There's no worldliness about him. He's just a whore.
Yeah.
And then you get the guy who was stealing the luggage and the transgender Secretary of Health, and you just unbelievably the woman who's Department of Energy, Secretary of Energy, who didn't know how many barrels of oil the U.S.
Yeah.
used.
I mean, it's just beyond incompetence. I don't know. It must be intentional. I mean, to put people, or the press speaker, who is this clown? This clown lady who can't even, I mean, she's just a puppet. I don't know. She's just
the new head of the CDC.
Yeah,
that's her.
No, I mean the White House. The what do you call it? Afro-American.
Oh, you mean the press secretary?
Yeah. I mean, she's. So...
I'm more forgiving to her, actually, because I think she's playing the worst hand you could possibly play. I think she's being asked questions that there's no answer to.
Well, she can, but she can. She's not allowed to. I mean, to.
Well, that's my point, though. So, I wasn't a big fan of Psaki either, but I thought she's playing the hand as well as she could. I mean, having to defend Biden administration's actions, is a losing job.
Mm-hmm.
Like the one that the press secretary who was off the charts was Kayleigh McEnany.
Mm-hmm.
She could intellectually destroy the questioner.
Right.
And what's her face? Huckabee Sanders was not bad.
Yeah.
And they had tough hands to play too, right? Being Donald Trump's press secretary couldn't be an easy job, right?
No.
You're constantly having to explain shit that you really going, oh my God, come on, Don.
Oh man. Dave, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you so much. I mean, it's always a pleasure and so educational. Learned so much from you. Dave, any other final words of wisdom, or want to send my my followers and listeners?
Well, let me give you a quick economic pitch. That I give on almost every podcast, but nevertheless, here's my elevator speech for why we're in trouble, for generationally in trouble. But there's the obvious, debt growing at 7.5% a year, right? You can't win that. So I think we're past the fail-safe point and all that crap. The de-dollarization world, that's the problem. But back in 1981, the market PE was about 6. I hate PE because you can fake them like crazy, but let's use it. It was about 6. So it was dirt cheap. Inflation was raging, but about to de-inflate. The Russians were desperate for capital, and they started selling resources for pennies on the dollar. The Chinese were coming out of the dark ages so badly that when they had to send their leader to the United Nations, they had to mooch money to pay for the trip. They had supposedly $38,000 in their entire banking system of US dollars. And so China started selling labor for pennies on the dollar. And so those were tailwinds that will never be repeated. So interest rates were at 20%, about to drop to 0 over next 40 years. Again, huge tailwinds. Because of those tailwinds, the market valuations, which is the most mean regressing metric in all of Wall Street, is market valuation. It should just flop around, and when the market's cheap, the valuations are low, and when the market's expensive, the valuations are high, and you can argue all you want about why they go high and why they go low, but the fact is they're mean regressing. It is a price divided by something that ought to track that price. So we're not talking about the cost of the market or the measured value. We're talking about the valuation. The valuations compounded over those 40 years at over 3% a year. There's no chance we repeat that either, because they're now at record valuations. And therefore, what if the next 40 years we don't have fresh labor coming in from China the way we did? We don't have fresh resources coming in from Russia the way we did. We are now at rock bottom interest rates, which everyone says, oh, low rates are bullish. No, dropping rates are bullish. Low rates are a goddamn disaster, because once the rates are down there, you don't get the tailwind of dropping rates anymore. And so none of those tailwinds are going to be there for the next 40 years. And so what happens if the market valuations back up? And then we compound at negative 3% a year for the next 40 years. That's a negative 6% swing per year on change in valuations.
Wow.
For 40 friggin' years. Now, I don't know how it's going to play out, but my brain tells me that that can't be won. And therefore, I believe that we're going to Nikkei our way into the next generation. And the Nikkei was an uninvestable market for a very long time, decades. And it might become uninvestable again. But it's not as bad as the US market. And so the question, and the world markets too, it turns out. The world markets are obviously heterogeneous, but they have their own problems, their own debt problems, their own everything. So I think we are about to enter a period in history where for several decades, the markets will be uninvestable. There will be winners, but they will be just outliers. They will be people who, fooled by randomness. They'll be the guy who flipped the coin 5 times and got 5 heads. And you'll think the guy's a genius, but he just was one of the lucky guys. And so I think that at some point we're going to start a generational bear market that is going to grind investors to dust. And I think in part it's because the boomers are going to start liquidating their assets. And you got this demographic problem. You got a population collapse going on in the world.
Yeah.
And so everything that during that 40-year period, the boomers showed up in the workplace. They brought their wives with them. We were young, we were eager, we'd shaken the pot habits and started making computers and stuff like that. And now I think those days are over. And I don't know when, but they might start this year, might start 5 years from now, but at some point, I think we're going to go into a generational bear market.
It would need huge structural changes, or I don't know, a huge transformation. I mean, huge action. I don't know what.
Right, and then the question becomes: is when that's over, do we then grow green shoots and come out the other side, or do we do a Roman Empire thing? Now, I think we have in the United States great resources, right? We got a pretty large acreage per capita. We've got natural resources, things like that. So I think optimism that it'll be a cyclical downdraft. I think there's reason for that optimism, but I don't think it's going to happen on a time scale that is imaginable to most investors.
Yeah,
I am the most bearish guy on Twitter, bar none. Maybe Husband, but not even Husband, because Husband now sort of tries to play the current game, and I stand firm on the idea that we're screwed.
So what do you invest in, if I may ask? Or what's your suggestion to people?
Well, I keep fishing around. I keep trying to trick the markets into duping me without putting enough money to actually be duped. So I'm trying to generate a karmic moment without spending a lot of money. So my most recent purchase, I bought Brazilian ETF. Okay. And Brazilian stocks are cheap. You got political risk, of course. Yeah. The Petrobras is dirt cheap. I think energies, resources, I think the story, although it's a very popular story, it takes so many years to build up the infrastructure to create the next glut. So I'm investing, by the way, in uranium, small caps through a two-man fund, Gehring and Rosenzweig.
I have high hopes for nuclear.
And I'm relatively unexposed to the equity markets. I'm I don't know, 20% equities.
Okay.
And a lot of gold. My house is 3 times the size it needs to be. It hangs off a cliff off of Cuba Lake. It's spectacular. I enjoy living in it. And I read analyses that said houses track inflation for the long term. So I said, okay, I'll tie up that much capital to track inflation. That's fine, because tracking inflation would be a big win for me. If I could just track inflation, I'm fine.
Yeah.
It's the fear that I won't track inflation that keeps me awake at night. So that's where I go.
And a little bit Bitcoin still, a little bit Bitcoin, just a little bit Bitcoin.
I'm not going to buy a little bit of Bitcoin. That to me is like buying a $10,000 life insurance policy.
You're going to go all in. Okay.
Well, an investment, a Bitcoin investment to be willing to bring the anxiety into my world. And the anxiety is not just about what they could do to me, but it's also just keeping track of, it's just so different, right? All of a sudden, it's like when I go to the store and someone says, oh, to buy your meal, you have to download the app, and I get pissed off. I don't want to have to download the app, right?
Right.
And I don't want to have to worry about all the subtleties of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will have to be committed to Bitcoin to go in there. It's got to be enough to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it's kind of have a hunch, buy a bunch model. And until I can buy a meaningful amount, good faith, I'm not buying it. I looked at it at $10 a coin. So
yeah, told me. Yeah, you told Marty. I mean, yeah.
And I don't lose sleep over that. I would have sold it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have held on to it.
A lot of people, a lot of OGs, sold, in between, and because they thought, it's not going to go, you wouldn't be the only one. But
well, let me put it this way: if 20 years from now, Bitcoin is in the dustbin of history, it will be in every textbook.
Right.
So it's not going to be. If you had a crystal ball and it showed you that future, it's not like it would blow your circuits.
Right.
Because it's either a revolution or digital tulip bulbs, right? And I try to make every decision based on the assumption if the decision goes terribly wrong, will you forgive yourself? Which means, was the process correct?
Right.
Well, I was on Hedgeye one day and I said, I made some reference to doing really well. I thought it was a good analysis, unless you consider performance a metric.
Right.
But I don't consider performance a metric. I consider the quality of the analysis the metric.
Right.
And if you get that right, I think over time you win.
Mm-hmm.
And if I owned WorldCom, I owned WorldCom and made 700%. Got out. That didn't make me a genius. It meant that I was just lucky as shit that I got out. Y2K spooked me out of WorldCom. I made sevenfold on Dell, and 4 or 5 fold on Warner Lambert, and all sorts of flyers. I was a bull and a half in the late 90s, and from the early 90s to the late 90s, and that was a sign we were in a mania. Right. I was 150% exposed to equities.
Wow.
That's not in my personality right now, right? There's nothing in my personality that says, Dave, go leverage. Leverage to me is like taking crack.
Yeah.
But it was a mania, and I got sucked in. I was 150% leverage and got out. And I don't consider it acumen. I consider it just dumb luck in which somehow the Lord oversaw my portfolio.
Yeah, but it's a mixture. It's a combination. I think you're not only lucky. I mean, the way, as far as I know you, you're very, sharp-minded and analytical, and you see a lot of things moving around. I think you have a bigger picture of economically and strategically.
Well, I saw the mania. I realized we were in a bubble.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it was I thought Y2K was going to pop it. Right. So I got the hell out. Y2K. The beauty of Y2K is there was a deadline. There's a timestamp. Now, what happened is I went into gold.
Right.
And then Y2K came and went. But I didn't sell. I didn't sell the gold. I had a short position with Doug Nolan's Prudent Bear Fund, with David Tice's Prudent Bear Fund. I didn't close that out. And then what was luck, because it was just an inflation hedge, I went strongly around 01, I think it was. It's also vague now. Strongly into energy.
Oh.
I was inflation fighting. I thought we were going to have an inflation problem. And I think we do, but it didn't show up in the headlines anywhere. Right? So it's one of those inflation problems that was silent. But I caught the dozen-year energy run. And so that created almost legendary performance for the knots. So the decade from January 1st of 2000 to December 31st of 2009, while everyone else suffered two pretty destructive bear markets, we're lucky if they broke even. I compounded at 13%.
Wow.
Now, I fucked up the entire next decade. I compounded at 4% while everyone else was partying. And so you say, well, you bone that. I go, yeah, well, it turns out over the 20, I still was 2% above the S&P annualized. So I just would have been, I so wish I had said, oh, Jeremy Grantham, when he said invest in fear, I remember vividly go, oh no, I'm not buying this market yet. It's not cheap enough yet. And he was dead right. If I had somehow done a balls to the wall, all in equities move, I would be on an island in the Caribbean right now. You know,
Right.
I'm still doing well. Starving academic does not, I'm not a starving academic. Things are
I think
working.
physical, commodities, energy, I think these are the things that.
Well, it's a tricky play though. So here's the question. So,
or uranium, whatever,
well, the Gehring and Rosenthal, I just trust those guys to know what they're doing. So I just turned it over to them, and not a lot of money yet, enough to kind of care, but I'm watching carefully, and at some point I'm going to go, okay, what I would love is to have sort of a bone crushing downturn. It might not even set the final bottom. It might be Nikkei 1985. But I would love to be able to, as I like to describe it gruesomely, cutting ring fingers off of dead soldiers on the battlefield and pulling gold teeth out of their heads and stuff. I'd love to be that guy. And I think if we have a really serious secular bear market, you'll have all the time in the world to do it, because I don't think it's just going to boink up. The dead cat bounces. So I don't think we're going to have I don't think we're going to have V bounces. We've had V bounces for 40 years. For 40 years, every time the market sold off hard, you look like an asshole if you didn't buy.
Yeah.
You look like an asshole if you sold into the sell-off. I think you're not going to look like an asshole this time. And I think you'll be able to buy patiently.
Right.
I don't think you'll have to rush into it, because I think it's going to maul equity investors. And by the time you will be the asshole for buying, you will be. When I was buying gold, there were like 20 guys in the world who thought that was a good idea.
What
price, say, buying gold.
What price was it?
I bought from 290 down to 270.
Very good. Wow.
And then I started buying some more, went up to around 450 and then stopped. And then it got to 1900, thought I was a genius, went back to about 1200, and I bought another wad because I thought it had kind of stabilized, and that worked out okay. But someone said, it was easy to buy back then because it was so cheap. And I go, the reason it was cheap is because no one in the world wanted it.
Right.
Nobody. The Bank of England was squashing it like a bug. They were shutting down the gold market completely. There's about a dozen guys out there saying, "Oh, I think gold looks good here," and somehow I had bought it and I didn't sell it. I stopped buying at 270 on the way down because the Nasdaq was still kind of running, and so I just felt like such a moron buying gold on the way down while the Nasdaq's going up, but in the end it worked out well. And I don't know. I think a big whoosh would get me to go strongly into the commodity world.
Yeah.
But the problem is, again, I started to say, the play is going to be tough because you can't buy a company whose livelihood depends on getting the authorities to let them drill and to let them build a pipeline. That's dangerous because the authorities will shut you down.
Yeah.
You need to buy a company that's like a royalty trust in which the infrastructure is already in place. Or you play the idea of a build out and you buy the companies that are the drillers, the pipeline builders and stuff like that. And I'm not very good at that sort of thing.
The real insider and specialist, right? I mean, inside knowledge, huh?
Well, or just listen to smart guys.
Yeah.
Someone like Fred Hickey's ranting about how you really ought to be buying these companies now. He got me back into gold equities a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
He's ranting about how cheap they were. And, I hate they're cheap. And then you read some article about optionality, about reserves. I go, I live on a lake. I'm not a fishery. I don't know how to make money with the fish in the lake right in front of my house. And so I don't want to hear about gold reserves. I want to hear about the fact that they can pull it out of the ground, sell it, and make money, and the stock sells cheaply. And so I didn't buy it. And then Fred starts quoting some of the metrics. I'm going, holy shit, that's cheap. Those are tobacco stocks.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so I started buying gold equities, and so far so good.
Mhm.
But I bought platinum miners. You wouldn't believe how cheap the platinum miners look. You can't. And I picked them off of YouTube, where some guy had like 100 views,
Mhm.
and he went through all the different platinum miners
Really?
and went through their balance sheets.
Amazing.
And I go, holy shit, he just made a really good case for the platinum miners. Then one day I'm talking about this in a podcast,
Yeah.
and a guy calls me and says, well, I'd like to chat because I'm the largest private holder of SBSW, and I want to talk to you about SBSW, which is one of the platinum miners.
Uh-huh.
I just had lunch with him twice up in the Adirondacks, because it turns out we live close to each other up in the Adirondacks, our cabin. And we sat there and just chatted about all this shit. And the guy's a commodities guru, small shop, not a big shop.
Uh-huh.
And
What do you need platinum for? I mean, where's it used? Like in industrial,
well, it's used in catalytic converters. So the one that's is that electric cars are not going to do what they say they're going to do. And second of all, I think they're really going to be really important if the hydrogen fuel cells pick up speed. Platinum has gone nowhere. So by the way, the platinum miners look dirt cheap. Their balance sheets look great. They've got net cash on the balance sheet. They're putting out an 8% dividend sort of number. I'll buy that all day long if those are stable, but I don't know if they are. And it's unaided by the price of platinum, which has been flat for 15 years. So if platinum ever decides to get legs, those guys are going to print money.
Love your thinking,
now,
strategy.
They're making a lot of their money off rhodium, it turns out.
Low time preference thinking. Very good. Yeah.
Right, but they're making a lot of their money off rhodium. It turns out there's apparently a big meteor landed in Africa, and that's where all the platinum and the rhodium and shit is coming from.
Really? Jesus.
Yeah, this is all news to me, right? And so, so the bottom line is Peter Lynch used to buy shit, and he'd have to wait 4 or 5 years for it to actually start making money. He'd go visit, like he went and visited the head of La Quinta, the motel chain, and the CEO says, "You're the first guy to visit. Come on in. Happy to chat with you." So one day I was interested in Cinnabon, because I loved the Cinnabons. And then I was watching Peter Lynch in a documentary in which he was going down memory lane when he was the legend, the GOAT. And he's walking he used to take his kids to the mall and watch where they shopped. And he was eating a Cinnabon, and he goes, "Oh, this is really good." And I go, "Oh, you've picked up on Cinnabon." So it turned out they went public, and I bought them. I ended up not making any money. I bailed on it for some reason. I can't remember even the thinking why I bailed. Made a ton off cigarettes, made a ton off tobacco, right before the big lawsuit that they lost.
Yeah, I have a issue with cigarettes because I wrote my PhD on the internal documents, based on internal documents of the tobacco industry, on the product liability. But because I'm an ex-smoker, actually. I used to smoke, for like 10 years, like in my youth, and then I got into, because I studied law, and I did a lot of investigative work and research, and went to United States and talked to insiders, whistleblowers. So, I know a lot about cigarettes. That's why I'm just telling you this.
Right. Well, that's, for me, that would be the equivalent of, not buying a prison REIT or not buying a payday lender. I'm not a big fan of those, but the cigarettes, they're kind of voluntary.
Yeah.
And so in any event, though, their PEs were ridiculously low. They
Uh-huh.
were paying humongous dividends, right? 9 to 12% for the big ones.
Wow, that's a lot. Yeah.
And they were about to get their asses sued. They were getting their asses sued by the states for 147 billion.
Right. Yeah.
And
Settlement.
I'm going, they've been ducking this shit. There's no way they're going to go out of business because then the states don't get paid.
Uh-huh.
And so what am I missing here? And I labor it. I go, this looks like an unbelievably great bottom feed right here. And everyone hated him, right? And then one day I see this little article that says, by the way, if the cigarettes companies lose the lawsuit, they'll have to raise cigarettes 50 cents a pack and pay it off for the next 20 years. I go, oh my God, it's a tax.
Yeah.
It's not even a hit. It's a tax. That's all it is. It's a 50 cent a pack tax. So I bought them and oh my God, did I make a lot of money off that?
Yeah. In Austria, I think it's a 75, 80%, it's all taxes on cigarettes. It's like all kinds of taxes.
Well, what screwed me up is the tobacco companies bought into the whole vaping thing and overpaid and screwed themselves up. I understand why they did it, but it turned out to not be a good idea. And but they've still been kicking out big ass dividends for it was so many years ago, I don't remember. But Michael Berry's model is if your investment goes down, it should be, if the investment's the right investment, just hang on to it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And the problem with that is there's a lot of investments that if they go down, they have nothing to show for it. Whereas if you have a tobacco stock that's paying 8% and it goes down, you're still getting that dividend.
I see. Okay.
So that model, Michael Berry's model, is there better be a revenue stream. David Einhorn's always bitching about how deep value stuff, there's no interest in it. And he talks about it like, therefore it's lousy to invest in. And as I've said, if you show me a company with a PE of 5 that no one cares about, I'll buy that all day long, because as long as it's a stable dividend, because they're priced to return 20% a year.
Yeah. Yeah. The internal documents of the tobacco cigarette corporations, they were thinking, because it's fascinating to read, because they were in this crisis mode and they were thinking, cannabis, if they could legalize, like massively lobby for the legalization of cannabis, then it would be I was hoping actually it would go into that direction, at least it's.
So I spent 2 long phone calls with Todd Harrison and his partners, in which they set up a cannabis fund. And I eventually ended up not biting. And the reason was not because of a lack of interest in cannabis, and I really liked Todd, but Todd was a derivatives trader at Morgan Stanley, I think, if I remember correctly, something like that. That's a short time scale mindset, right? That's a guy who's looking for the quick kill. And I was really worried about getting into a cannabis fund in which it went down. The guy said, oh, fuck it, and sold it, liquidated it. And I go, no, I do not want my investment liquidated, right? If you own Bitcoin at 20,000, it went down to 10, and then someone sold it out from underneath you, you could be really mad, right? So I needed to go with someone who I thought had strong hands. There's a small cap guy named Eric Cinnamon, who I occasionally chat with. And he listened to every conference call. He asked questions. These are all these micro cap level. And he's got a fund. What's really interesting is that he is 80% cash. Right. I am paying Eric not to invest his money yet. And I think Eric knows these small caps. I've sent him small cap ideas that come across my doorstep. He doesn't. I think if it's not ones he follows, he doesn't care about it. He always thanks me, but I still figure he can at least take a peek at it and say, oh, look at that. That is interesting. But he listens to hundreds of conference calls a year.
Really?
And that's the guy who I want investing in small caps. And I can't do small caps at all. And so I try to find the smart guys, try to find the guys who really wait until they see the whites of the eyes and who really understand what a buying opportunity is and what's just a sucker bet.
Yeah, you need a real deep insight into all these facets and aspects of, yeah. I mean, my wife, she's a chemist actually from my background, lots of background, and she's very used to be, also specialized in cannabis, hemp, and THC and CBD, and and she wants to develop her own product also.
Well, my wife is into cannabis too, but
Really?
on another level, on an altogether another level. Here's a question for you. How many prominent guys can you name who actually talk about the markets, not in terms of technical language like momentum and money flows and crap like that, but rather in terms of just valuation, real valuation, not relative valuation, not saying, oh, this is going to do better than this. I don't care. They both get crushed. I don't care if mine got half crushed, right? That's the problem. So how many guys do you know who really look at absolute valuations and talk and do Graham Dodd sort of an analysis and look for cheap?
I'm not good at names, but I'm not even sure about, probably heard about Lena Alden.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she's real good, but she's more like, is she like more into ETF? Into what do you call it, funds and more like emerging markets. But I'm not sure whether she's like in specialized.
So the language you get, someone like Jeremy Grantham speaks in a pretty Graham Dodd language. Jesse Felder, John Hussman, these are very few, though.
Very few, exactly.
Very few. And when someone shows me the market in some trend line that goes back to 2019, my God, you couldn't be more wrong, in my opinion. I want a trend line that goes back to 1900.
Yeah.
One of the questions I like to ask is why a lot of people put upwardly sloping trend lines on valuation. Why should the valuation trend upward?
Exactly. Oh, did you hear about the guy is a genius? I mean, there's even a wonderful documentary about this guy, Armstrong. I think he used to be, wasn't he like in prison or something for some time? Armstrong.
Martin Armstrong.
Yeah, the guy is a real.
I communicated with him when he was in prison.
No way.
And his daughter would get it. And then, it wasn't deep, meaningful stuff. It was just.
What do you think about this guy? I mean, is he really?
I can't tell. I mean, there's guys who are so outside the box. You go, wait a minute, you've lost sight of the box now, right? And so Martin tends to get into the geopolitical stuff, which I really like, but I don't like it for investing.
Yeah.
My investing is different than my, Jeffrey Epsteining, and so I don't know. The guys who predict crashes don't correct anything. If someone somehow thinks, if someone thinks that we're going to have a plunge and that's going to correct anything, they're dreaming. The way you correct markets in earnest is you grind the investors to dust. That's here's the problem. I think a lot of people think that Powell is attempting to curb inflation. I think Powell's attempting to curb speculation.
Wow.
Yeah, if I'm right, that means he's not going to let up until the markets tell him to let up, which means the market's got to take a beating. And then the question is, does he have the control to then somehow take his foot off the throat? Or when he takes his foot off the throat, you find out you suffocated him like George Floyd. Right? So interesting metaphor, Dave. So I think Powell's not going to let go until the speculative furor has been drained out of the markets.
Oh, that's
we're near all-time highs. It makes no sense. The economy got completely hosed by COVID lockdowns.
Right.
Everything's wrong with this. Everything's wrong with this picture. They talk about a recession. They go, oh, we're going to have a soft landing. If you're talking about a landing, it's never soft. Right? The fact that you had to land, a great quote is that you'll have enough fuel to get to the crash site. And so there's some real smart guys who see just horrors ahead of us at some point, unknowable point. So I'm not alone. I had a funny exchange. I'll tell you, sometimes I wonder. I had a three-way with Larry Summers and Stephen Roach by email.
What? Really?
I've communicated with those guys often for years. I used to chat late at night by email with Elizabeth Warren. We would swap emails late at night when we were both bored. Roach said, I said some blah, blah, blah about the markets being fucked, just to start the conversation. Roach said it's going to be like landing this economy is going to be like landing on an aircraft carrier in a typhoon. He says, might be soft, but I don't think so. and Summers chimed in and said, I pretty much agree with Stephen. And so they're smart guys who see crash landing ahead, but crash doesn't mean fast. I think it's got to be slow. I think you have not corrected the markets until you've corrected attitude.
Mm-hmm.
If everyone's looking for the next dip, if everyone somehow thinks you can't be hurt if you just buy and hold, you got to get them to the point where they go, I'm not touching equities again. This is painful. That will be the low when people are swearing off, like they swore off gold,
right?
Like they swore off tobacco. The reason energy is so interesting, because I was in energy. I actually got saved a lot of money because Cornell booted me out of my energy funds. I didn't even notice because I don't watch my own accounts. I have some screen I watch. I didn't know that a year earlier they'd kick me out of energy, put me in a life cycle fund. So it saved me some money. And I asked some hedge fund guys, should I go back in now, knowing this? And they said no, and I didn't go back in, and that saved me some more money. But then I started going back in when they kicked Exxon out of the Dow. And at about the same time, Felder said that energy used to be 16% of the S&P and it's now 2%. I go, both of those are bottom calls. Both of those are screaming. You can't have an economy that has 2% of the investment in energy.
Yeah.
And so that it had to be the start. And so when I started buying energy, if it was the bottom, I caught the bottom, right? It was the best bottom grab I've ever done. But I bought it because energy was hated. And I don't even know why. I don't know why. Well, it didn't help when barrels of oil were selling for minus $37 a barrel. That was a little detrimental to people's attitudes. But so yeah, if you put a gun to my head and said, buy something now with a lot of money, I'd buy an index, I'd buy a Fidelity fund on energy.
Right. And have a headache. Yeah. Not deal with a headache. Yeah.
And then sleep at night.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I like dividends. This share buyback as a replacement for dividends. Oh my God, does that make me gag? They're taking on debt. They're buying overvalued shares to buy back their own, they're taking money off their balance sheet to buy overvalued shares to boost their stock options.
What a con.
It's a reach for yield, right? If your balance sheet was getting 5% or 6%, which it now is, you would be a prudent runner of the company and say, okay, well, we should have a cash hoard, and it'll sit there and collect 5 or 6% while we wait for the next opportunity. But when the interest rates got to zero, then it's like, well, we're getting killed on our balance sheet, so let's buy back shares. Oh, let's take on debt because debt's so cheap. So now we have this huge corporate debt bubble because we bought back shares. Now it's got to roll over. It's sitting at horrid interest rates by comparison. So I think we have to have a collapse of corporate debt. We have to have a disastrous corporate debt correction.
Right.
Because all that debt we could look at boot up a plot of corporate debt. It's horrifying.
It's horrifying. And you just take a look at, I don't know, European Union, Germany, also. I mean, it's just the number of.
It's all over the world.
Yeah, it's falling apart. Everything is just crashing.
Yeah, we've had negative rates over there across the pond.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised, I wouldn't be surprised if we have the crash here first in the European Union, the euro, whatever. I mean, the number of insolvencies, bankruptcies, it's mind-boggling.
And they haven't really picked up steam yet.
Yeah, they haven't. No.
But so, for example, our housing bubble doesn't appear to have burst, although one could argue it's burst. It's just a slow motion burst.
Right.
But when you've got mortgages at under 3 and now they're at 7, you by definition can only buy about half the house you could have bought, which means therefore the housing market's twice the price it should be.
I don't know. I see a horror scenario. I don't know. I don't think it takes much longer, to be honest with you. I mean, how long do you think this whole thing can, kicking and down the road? I mean, it's like, what is it? 1, 2, 3 years? I mean, yeah, they could
given up, predict what or when, not both, right?
Yeah.
And I predicted what, not when. It
Yeah.
feels like it's close. I think we're in a recession at some level. So you know how the labor market is tight. Some idiots call it a strong labor market. I go, no, because the actual labor participation sucks.
Yeah.
It's a broken labor market because the guys who are selling their labor and the guys who are buying their labor aren't coming to terms, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
If you were selling cars and the buyers of the cars and the sellers of the cars couldn't agree on the price, you got a problem for that industry. And so I think we have a tight labor market that's causing the illusion of a stronger economy than it really is. And as a consequence, I think at some point we're going to wake up and say, just because you can't hire at Walmart doesn't mean the economy's rocking. Because we could be in the depths of the Depression, with the exception of San Francisco, Walmart's going to still have to hire people. And so I think the by the way, the recent employment number is something like 900,000 part-time jobs and negative 500,000 full-time jobs. That's a disaster. Or as the meme said, Karen, what's her name? The press secretary, what's her name? Karen.
Yeah, I forgot. Sorry. Yeah.
Whatever. Press secretary.
Yeah.
The Babylon Bee said that the economy is doing so great, people have twice as many jobs as they used to.
Oh, they're great.
Yeah, the Bee is phenomenal. So, in any case, yes, we agree we're doomed.
Dave, yeah, it was really great talking. I always learned so much from you. Anyway, by the way, my final thought was, what I think what America, United States needs is like they have to bring out like super new technologies, advanced development, innovative technologies, and then it needs a total it needs a transformation.
Well, but the problem is a lot of the new technology looks like illusory wealth to me.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a book by Robert Gordon, which I hype a lot. And it's something about wealth creation. If you go on Amazon and search Robert Gordon, it's on wealth creation. It's just a brilliant book. And Robert Gordon says between 1870 and 1940, 1870 and 1940, I think, no, 1970, wealth creation was spectacular. And then it went really pretty flat from 1970 on. Went much shallower from 1970 on, and it went flat at some point, with a slight bump between 95 and 2005 when tech sort of showed up briefly to give it a boost. But there's, NVIDIA trades at 45 times revenues. What a stupid market that is. Facebook could go away today and no one would notice it missing. Obviously, people who like Facebook would. But it's not like the world would come to a standstill because Facebook went under. Tesla could go away today. We wouldn't notice anything. So NVIDIA, Tesla, Facebook. I noticed Nikola's still in the market. Holy crap, that didn't go down. Microsoft's gains over the last, I'd say 10 years were probably 5-fold increase in valuation. The 10 stocks that are driving the Fortune 500, the S&P 500 stocks, are all these puffy stocks, or all these stocks elevated on a blanket of air, and what bothers me is not that 10 stocks are driving the market, but rather that there's 490 stocks that are returning nothing. There are some within that are, but that collectively, the S&P 490 is returning nothing. And so the question is, what kind of economy is it? What kind of market is it when the 490 of the biggest companies in the United States return nothing?
Yeah, it's a bubble.
And if you're making products and making money, where's that money going? And the answer is not to investors.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the Cantillon effect.
Yeah, the Canton effect. Yeah, there you
And it turns out the guys who own the company and the big money guys, the wealthy and powerful, they're getting it by the time it gets down to Joe Sixpack. Why do we have to make money?
Exponential loss of purchasing power. Yeah,
Right. We don't have to make money because we don't have a voice.
exactly. Yeah.
The indexers don't have a voice. And so there's 490 companies who don't have to answer to anyone for not providing payment to the owners of the company that are down the food chain.
Yeah.
And so this too shall come to an end at some point.
Yeah. So Dave, any other publications coming up or articles or besides Twitter?
I'm going to do another podcast with Tommy Kerrigan, Tom Luongo, and Jim Kunstler. Those are always
Tom Luongo.
They get raucous.
Respect this guy. Yeah.
I'm supposed to hype my year in review on Amazon, even though it's free on the internet. For $20, you can pay to read it.
Of course.
And also, what's a little more interesting is my 2009 to 2012 year in reviews were, I didn't put them up there. It turns out Bob Moriarty put them up there. He did all the work and just said, click here. It's now up on Amazon. I think his goal is to actually produce the entire anthology from 09 to
that would be amazing. Yeah, we should bring it out as a book. Yeah, or as a documentary.
The books are 300 pages a piece. The 09 to 12 and the 2022, they're each 300 pages.
Yeah.
And so it'll be about 5 or 6 volumes of 300 pages talking about whatever crawled up my ass that year.
No, it's
and I said, that doesn't sound pedestrian and trivial and sort of naive. And he said, no, not at all. Not at all.
No.
I haven't read my years in review since I wrote them.
Really?
Okay. Well, go to Amazon. Think of it as a Patreon contribution. Buy one,
Yeah, definitely.
They're not over formatted. They're not, they got uploaded and they're kind of rough because there's little glitches that appear and things like that. But
it's purely authentic.
I don't want to oversell it. I figured out how to get the glitches out finally, but
no, I love your work. We all love your work, Dave. So I hope, we can do this again, maybe in whatever 6-12 months time.
Yeah. When something changes.
Yeah, something. I have a feeling something's going to change, but I don't know. It just
feels like it.
Anyway,
it's not going to be for the good.
Okay, Dave. Thank you so much again. Okay, talk to you soon.